Chapter 76. Destiny? The silent night sky is like a profound painting, slowly unfolding in the boundless universe. The stars in the sky are like countless bright diamonds inlaid on black velvet, flashing a soft and mysterious light. The moonlight is like water, sprinkling on the earth and covering everything with a layer of silver veil. In this quiet night, time seems to stand still, making people forget the hustle and bustle of the day. At this time, Zai was lying on the grass, quietly looking at the bright stars in the sky, not knowing what he was thinking in his heart. Just then, he felt some movement beside him and turned around to look. He found that Xiao Yang had sat down next to him at some point. He turned to look at Zai and said, "Are you worried about something?" Zai did not answer immediately, but sat up and said after a while, "Xiao Yang, do you think what I did is right?" Before Xiao Yang could answer, Zai continued, "You said that my meeting with the GS ball was destined, but I handed it over to Mr. Du so easily. With the alliance responsible for protecting it, I think even the rockets would find it difficult to get it. Doesn't that mean that there is no such thing as fate in this world, and that I got the GS ball was just a coincidence?" Hearing Zai's words, Xiao Yang couldn't help but chuckle and said, "I didn't expect that you would care so much about those things. You obviously didn't think much about it at the time and just handed it over." In response to this, Zai shook his head slightly and said, "Our current strength is still too weak. GS ball has been targeted by the rockets. We are unable to protect him with our current strength. If Mr. Daigo had not suddenly arrived, both of us might have been in danger. So it is best to leave it to the alliance." Xiao Yang nodded to Xiao Zhi's words. He knew that since he had been targeted, he could not keep this hot potato with him any longer, otherwise he might die without knowing how. He looked up at the starry sky, and then said, "Since you know that there is nothing wrong with what you did, why are you asking these questions?" Hearing Xiao Yang's question, Zai lay down again, put his hands on his head, and was silent for a while before saying, "Xiao Yang, actually, at the beginning, you told me that my meeting with the GS ball was the choice of fate. I still didn't believe it, but after getting the GS ball, I always have a very strange feeling." After hearing what Zai said, Xiao Yang looked at him again, very curious about what he felt. At this time, Zai looked very distressed, and said incoherently, "I just always feel like there is something calling me, as if I had a dream or something happened. In short, it is very strange. Oh, I don't know how to describe that feeling." Just when Zai was scratching his head and feeling annoyed, a pleasant voice suddenly sounded from behind, "I didn't expect that Zai would care so much about that kind of thing, it's really strange." Hearing this, Zai couldn't help but turn his head and looked over. Then he saw Sunday standing behind him at some point. At this moment, she was wearing a cool white lace nightgown. "Sunday, when did you get here?" "She came when you started talking about your destiny with GS ball," Xiao Yang answered. Sunday imitated them, slowly walked to Zai's right, sat down gently, and then said, "So Zai, what do you think? Because you have these strange feelings, you feel that there is indeed a fateful connection between you and the GS ball, but because you cut off this connection with your own hands, you feel a little distressed." In response to Sunday's question, Zai still shook his head and said, "No, I don't care about this. It's mainly because I always feel that the GS ball is conveying something to me and wants me to accomplish something." "I see. Now I understand what you said. Do you think that what GS ball wants you to accomplish is very important, but now you haven't even figured out that thing and you have to give up? Are you worried about this?" Xiao Yang looked at Zai and asked. Zai said excitedly, "Yes, that's right. I always feel that what he wants me to accomplish is also very important to me." Pfft. Hearing this, Sunday couldn't help but laugh out loud, wiped his eyes, and said, "Since you think that matter is related to you, what is there to worry about?" Hearing Sunday's words, Zai couldn't help but turn his head to look at the other party, his eyes full of confusion. Sunday hugged his legs with both hands, looked up into the distance, and said softly, "I really didn't believe in such a thing as fate at first, but by accident, I met a young man. Although he looked very naive, he was very magical. I was unknowingly led by him to another unknown direction." At this point, the corners of her mouth couldn't help but rise slightly, and then she continued, "Originally, my life trajectory was clear. I would stay in that school to complete my studies. After graduation, I would take over a certain industry under the arrangement of my family, and then slowly step into the upper class circle and talk to various high-level figures. In the end, like most people in the circle, I would marry the son of a big shot, have children, and slowly grow old until the end of my life. But because of him, everything has changed for me. I know that I am on a brand new path. Although I don't know where I will go, every day of my life is full of surprises and challenges. Seeing Sunday looking at him with a beautiful smile, Zai's heart couldn't help but have a ripple, but then he felt puzzled, and kept thinking in his heart, could the person Sunday is talking about be me? Xiao Yang, who was sitting next to him, felt like a bright light bulb at this moment. Then, Sunday was heard saying, "Do you think this is the choice of fate? If it weren't for that accident, I might have taken a different trajectory, but it happened. So I think that if there really is a fateful connection between you and the GS ball, it will definitely not be severed because of this kind of thing. You and him will definitely meet again one day in the future. The only problem is that we don't know whether such a meeting will be good or bad." Chapter 77. Zai thought carefully about Sunday's words, then he let out a long sigh and said, "That's true. There's no point in me worrying about this kind of thing now. Let's talk about tomorrow's matter first." Hearing Zai's words, Xiao Yang nodded and said, "Actually, the main reason I came here to find you is because of this matter." Hearing their words, Shende also recalled what Mr. Du mentioned to them today. At that time, Du said to them, "By the way, Zai, if I'm not mistaken, you should go to the Crimson City to challenge the gym leader there, right?" When Zai heard what Du said, he was stunned, then nodded and said, "Yes, we are going to challenge the Crimson Gym next. If that's the case, I think you can just hold the gym match here, because tomorrow Aju, one of the 4 heavenly kings of Chengdu, will be here. He used to be the gym leader of the Light Red Gym, but because he became one of the 4 heavenly kings, he has handed the gym over to his daughter Axing. But even so, he is still qualified to award the challenger batch. What do you think? Mr. Aju of the Chengdu 4 heavenly kings, is this true? Can we challenge the 4 heavenly kings? I absolutely want to challenge them, please, Mr. Du." End of memories. Xiao Yang couldn't help but look at Xiao Ji helplessly and said, "I didn't expect you to agree so easily." Sunday also nodded with a wry smile. Even the gym leaders were so powerful, let alone the 4 heavenly kings. She was quite unsure now, but thinking back to how Satoshi looked when he heard that he could challenge the 4 heavenly kings, she couldn't help but said with a hint of sarcasm, "Satoshi at that time was so excited as if he had won the lottery. You're so childish, I think I've only seen you like this before in class at school." Zai scratched his head a little embarrassedly. Thinking about it carefully, he was indeed too excited at that time and agreed without Xiao Yang and the others' consent. However, he still said, "But they are the 4 heavenly kings. There are not many opportunities to challenge the 4 heavenly kings." "That's true. There's no point thinking about it now. Let's think of a solution as soon as possible," said Sunday. Aju, one of the 4 heavenly kings of Chengdu, is a very powerful figure. Although it is in the form of a gym battle, he still should not be underestimated, Xiao Yang said. Sunday also said, "According to the information I have obtained, the original Crimson Gym should have been the most powerful gym after the Changli Gym. Later, because Mr. Aju stepped down, he handed the gym over to his daughter Miss Axing. This caused the Crimson Gym to be ranked last among the 8 gyms in Kanto. Originally, I thought this gym should be the easiest to pass." Zai looked away embarrassedly, but still said, "But it's a rare opportunity, isn't it? The 4 heavenly kings of Chengdu, I don't know how strong Mr. Aju is. I am very much looking forward to tomorrow's gym battle. Mr. Aju, to us, we are more than just the 4 heavenly kings." Hearing Xiaoyang's words, Zai couldn't help but look at him curiously. Although he didn't say anything, his eyes were full of questions. It was obvious that he was asking, in addition to the 4 heavenly kings, does Mr. Aju have any other identities? Xiao Yang looked at the other person and said, "Aju, you are the king of poison, and you are from a ninja family. I'm afraid your level of using poison is much stronger than that Hera. Poison type." After hearing Xiao Yang's words, Xiao Ji frowned. The shadow that Hera had cast on him before was not ordinary. The poison type could be said to be the one that Xiao Ji least wanted to face at the moment. "We really should plan it carefully." The next day. "You're finally here, Aju. At this time, a man in blue ninja costume nodded to Du. He did not wear a forehead protector or a mask like traditional ninjas, but instead had a red scarf around his neck. Aju said to Du, I have studied the antidote and toxin you gave me. Don't worry, there is nothing wrong with the antidote. Hearing what Aju said, Daigo, who was standing on the left side of Watari, couldn't help but say, it seems that Hera is really too proud. He thought he could easily get rid of Satoshi and the others, but he didn't expect me to appear suddenly. After hearing what Daigo said, Aju couldn't help but look at the three people standing behind Du and said, I think you should be Zai, Xiao Yang and Sunday that Du mentioned to me. I have to say, young people really make heroes. If it weren't for you, everyone in the Pokémon Center might be in danger. In response to Aju's praise, Zai shook his head and said, no, I should be blamed for this. Hera's target was the GS ball in my hand. If it weren't for me, everyone wouldn't be involved. How can this be all blamed on you, Zai? At this moment, Daigo interrupted and said, no matter what Hera's purpose is, you have indeed bought a lot of time and helped a lot of people. Not to mention that Team Rocket even sent out Hera for the GS ball. That thing should not be given to the other party, otherwise who knows what terrible things they will do with the GS ball. Du also nodded and said, Daigo is right, you don't need to blame yourself for this. In fact, the damage caused is not as great as you imagined. Most people were only slightly injured and no one died. Moreover, this time we caught the big fish Hera. You may not know how difficult it is to catch a cotter of Team Rocket. This time we actually made a big profit. Aji, who had also fought with Team Rocket's leaders, nodded. Then he looked at Zai and the other two and said, I heard from Du that you guys want to challenge the Crimson Gym next. After hearing what Aju said today, Zai couldn't help but said excitedly, yes, Mr. Aju, I heard from Mr. Du that we can challenge you directly. I wonder if it's possible. Seeing Zai's eager look, Aju couldn't help but smile and said, of course, the main reason I came here today, besides dealing with Hera's poison, is to challenge you. Then, the other party's expression suddenly changed, and his eyes were like a falcon, constantly flashing sharp light. Well, I think you should all be ready. Although it is a gym battle, I will not show mercy, so you must be prepared. Chapter 78. In a battlefield in the Pokémon Center, Zai and Aju were looking at each other from a distance. Zai, in the next battle, I will only use 2, and you can use all Pokémon, Aju shouted to Zai on the opposite side. When Zai heard the other party's words, he couldn't help but be stunned, but then he understood what the other party meant, and muttered to himself, can I use all the Pokémon? Now Pikachu's injury has not healed yet, and Froggy's level is not high enough. The only 4 I can use are Infernape and the others. Xiao Yang and the others who were sitting in the audience at this time also heard what Aju said. In addition to Xiao Yang and the other 4, there were also Pikachu and Pidgeot who were wrapped in bandages. At this time, Daigo asked Watari beside him, what level of Pokémon do you think Aju will send out? Without giving much thought to Daigo's question, Du immediately replied, the 2 Pokémon sent out by a gyro should not exceed the King level, and most likely they will be at the Quasi-King level. Hearing the conversation between the two, Sunday couldn't help but turn around and ask, why is that? Didn't Mr. Aju say that he would only use 2 Pokémon? Although Zai currently has several Pokémon that he can't use, he still has 4 that can be used as combat power, and all of them have reached the Quasi-King level. Isn't Mr. Aju a little too arrogant? In response to Sunday's question, Daigo shook his head and said, no, it's not like that. There is an essential difference between the 4 Heavenly Kings and the King-level Pokémon trainers. Although they are called the 4 Heavenly Kings, they may have more than just King-level Pokémon. The title of the 4 Heavenly Kings refers to the top 4 trainers in a region. In response to Daigo's words, Watari beside him nodded and said, Akira, if you must say, he can actually be called a champion-level trainer, because he has 3 champion-level Pokémon in his hands. Therefore, his command level can be said to be far beyond most trainers. But as you said, isn't Mr. Aju using a Quasi-King level Pokémon? Even if Mr. Aju has strong command ability, it would be quite difficult to fight against so many Pokémon of the same level at the same time. Zai's ability is also very strong. So Sendai was still a little puzzled by their words. It was Xiao Yang who answered her question. He shook his head and said, no, it's not what you think. A champion level trainer doesn't just mean that he has champion level Pokémon. More importantly, it's because his understanding and tactics have matured. In short, you will know if you just keep watching. Ash, he's my first Pokémon, go ahead, Gengar. Zhirong Aju took out the Pokeball and released a purple Pokémon. It had a pair of scarlet eyes and a grinning mouth, just like a ghost, but not that scary. Instead, it stuck out its tongue at Zai in a mischievous manner. Is it Gengar? Then I'll use it. Go ahead and stab the Dragon King. Zai immediately took out the Thorn Dragon King. Aju looked at the two Pokémon facing each other on the field, then nodded to signal Zai to attack first. Zai immediately understood what the other party meant and immediately ordered, Dragon King, use Prey Rain. The Thorn Dragon King raised his head and spit out bubbles from his mouth. Then a large dark cloud appeared in the sky, and raindrops fell down little by little, soon forming a downpour. Gengui, use Shadow Ball. Gengar immediately put his hands together, and then a black shadow ball condensed in his hands, and then threw it at the Thorn Dragon King in front of him. After the Thorn Dragon King dodges, use the Freezing Ray. Gengui uses Shadow Sneak Attack. Relying on his speed, Dragonite quickly dodged Gengar's Shadow Ball, but just as he was gathering the freezing beam in his mouth, Gengar suddenly dived underground, and then suddenly appeared from behind him, hitting him in the back with a fist filled with ghost energy. After being attacked by the shadow, Dragonite immediately turned around and used Freeze Ray on Gengar, but the opponent hid in the shadow again and avoided Dragonite's attack. Use the water gun to lift yourself into the air. Gengar can't hide in the shadow for too long. Wait for him to come out and then attack with the water cannon. The Thorn Dragon King immediately used the old method and used the reaction force of the water gun to lift himself into the air, while at the same time, he stared intently at the bottom. You did a good job, Zai. Now I will show you how a ninja fights. The fighting style of ninjas. After hearing what Aju said, Zai couldn't help but reveal a puzzled expression. Come out Gengar, use Shadow Clone to get closer to the opponent. Hearing what Aju said, Gengar immediately emerged from the shadow, then used his Shadow Clone and his floating ability to quickly approach the Thorn Dragon King in the air. Although I don't know what he wants to do, as long as we get rid of all the clones, the Dragon King will use the water gun. The Thorn Dragon King spit out several streams of water in succession, scattering all of Gengar's clones until the last one. That must be the real body. Go ahead, Dragon King, use the water cannon. The Thorn Dragon immediately released a huge column of water, spraying it towards the last Gengar. But then, an unbelievable scene appeared. The water cannon hit Gengar head-on, but he disappeared directly. What? They are all clones, where is the real Gengar? Zai immediately began to observe the surroundings, and then suddenly realized that there was a strange feeling behind King Thorn. Without saying a word, he shouted to King Thorn, be careful behind you. Hearing Zai's shout, Dragonite turned around immediately, but at the moment he turned around, Gengar's figure appeared from behind him, and a ghost energy that was even more terrifying than before hit his abdomen head-on. The Thorn Dragon King couldn't help but cry out in pain, and his body fell rapidly toward the ground. Fortunately, he turned around in time and used a water gun to reduce the impact force. Just when he wanted to look up at Gengar, the other party suddenly appeared in front of him. Gengui, use Hypnosis. Pink halos suddenly appeared at Gengar's eyes, and the hypnosis hit the Thorn Dragon King head-on. The Thorn suddenly felt his eyelids becoming heavier and heavier, and an irresistible sleepiness invaded his brain. Finally, his body fell backwards, and the whole Pokémon just lay on the ground and fell into a deep sleep. Dragon King, wake up quickly. Seeing that the Thorn Dragon King had actually fallen asleep like this, Zai couldn't help but shout anxiously. Gengui first uses characteristic swap, then uses Dream Eater. Gengar immediately put his hands together, and then suddenly a series of halos appeared on Dragon King's body, and then the halos were directly put on Gengar's body and sank into his body. The last phantom like him flew out from his body and hit the Thorn Dragon King directly. The sleeping Thorn Dragon King immediately opened his eyes, his pupils shrank to the extreme, and then he rolled his eyes, completely losing his ability to fight. Chapter 79. Infernape vs. Gengar. No, it can't be, Zai's King Drake was knocked down like this. Sunday covered his mouth with his hands and said in disbelief. Xiao Yang looked at the rain dripping from the sky, his expression not looking very good, this time it's really troublesome, the rain hasn't stopped yet, and Jengar has used characteristic swap again, and gained the ease of King Kong. Xiao Zhi's prayer for rain can be said to be a loss without gaining the goal. Daigo at the side couldn't help but say, Aju, he really doesn't know how to show mercy. After all, this is also a gym battle, Aju has to show some skills, Du said. Pikachu, seeing that Zai fell into a disadvantage so quickly, Pikachu with a bandage on his face couldn't help but show a worried expression. Pai, seeing this, Pidgeot beside him stretched out his wings which were also wrapped in bandages and patted him gently, as if to comfort him. On the battle stage, Zai silently took back the Thorn Dragon King. There was no sign of discouragement on his face. Instead, he asked Aju excitedly, is this the way ninjas fight? Haha, that's right. Seeing that such a quick defeat did not affect Zai's mentality, Aju couldn't help but show him an expression of admiration. Then he crossed his arms and explained to Zai, although I didn't perform any ninjutsu, in fact, I was using the secrets of ninjutsu throughout the battle just now. First, he used his shadow clone to lure me, and then, when the water gun trick of the Dragon King was about to hit his main body, he used his spirit to dodge in advance, disrupting my judgment, and then caught me off guard. Is that right? Ha ha ha. Seeing that Zai understood so quickly, Aju couldn't help but laugh and said, it's not just that. The shadow attack just now was actually a very important part. Hearing what Aju said, Zai couldn't help but reveal a puzzled look. He really didn't expect that the shadow sneak attack just now actually worked. However, Aju did not let Zai's question continue, and immediately said, ninjas and assassins actually have many similarities. The first point in starting a battle is to collect intelligence. The shadow attack just now played that role. Through that sneak attack, I roughly understood the physical strength, attack power, and reaction speed of your Thorn Dragon King. Although the method you used to send the Dragon King into the air through the water gun did surprise me, it does not affect my overall layout, because ninjas and assassins both focus on killing with one blow. The only difference is that ninjas will make various arrangements, interfere with or consume opponents during this period to increase their chances of killing, while assassins will concentrate all their energy on the final blow. This is the biggest difference between the two. After hearing what Aju said, Zai suddenly realized, but then his expression began to become serious. The current situation was very unfavorable for him. The fast attack that he was proud of was completely useless in front of Aju. Jengar's playing style was too unpredictable. Zai looked at the remaining Pokeballs, thought for a moment, then took out one and threw it out. It's up to you, fiery monkey. After a flash of white light, Infernape with blue veins on his face appeared on the field. Infernape. Why? Seeing Zai's choice, Sunday in the audience couldn't help but ask in surprise. Xiao Yang on the side touched his chin and said, I think Zai wants to bet on the explosive power of Infernape. I'm going to count on you from now on, Infernape, Zai said to Infernape on the field. Infernape raised his hand and gave Ash a thumbs up, giving him a majestic back. Now it's our turn to attack first. Jengar uses Kiki's hidden soul. Gengui immediately disappeared from the spot. Seeing this, Zai said to Infernape, Infernape, use bodybuilding. Zai immediately let Infernape use a strengthened move, because he knew very well that with the free swimming characteristic and Jengar's already ridiculously fast speed, Infernape would definitely not be able to dodge the next move. I saw Hubeo raising his hands and making a bodybuilding pose. Red light emanated from his whole body, and his attack and defense capabilities were enhanced. Just as Infernape finished using bodybuilding, Jengar immediately appeared behind him. He swung out his purple little fist and hit Jengar on the back, sending it flying. Don't stop, Infernape, and continue using bodybuilding. Infernape immediately stood up and shook his head. This time he placed his hands under his chest, clenched his fists, and tensed his muscles, once again increasing his attack and defense. Given the current situation, Aju immediately changed his tactics. In that case, Jengar, let's use hypnosis. Jengar's figure immediately approached Infernape at a rapid speed, his eyes once again emitting a pink halo, and hit the opponent head-on. Seeing this, Zai couldn't help but curl his lips and immediately ordered Infernape, use fire punch now. Infernape immediately clenched his right hand, and a ball of blazing flame appeared on his hand. Under Jengar's surprised gaze, he quickly waved it at the other party. Gang! Jengar was caught off guard and was hit directly in the face by the flaming fist. He couldn't help but scream and his whole body quickly retreated backwards. It's strange. If the information I got is correct, Xiaoxi's Infernape should have the characteristic of anger a cup ointment, not motivation, Aju couldn't help but said in surprise when he saw this scene. But then, he immediately discovered that Infernape's eyelids were constantly sinking, and then his whole body fell backwards, snot bubbles came out of his pig-like nose, and he just fell to the ground and fell asleep. Du, who saw this scene on the stage, couldn't help but say, so that's how it is, Satoshi's Infernape is quite special. It can actually accumulate the emotion of anger. Hearing Du's words, Xiao Yang beside him couldn't help but sigh, they are really worthy of being the champion level 4 heavenly kings, their vision is different from others. Then he nodded and said, Ash's Infernape is indeed very special. Just like Mr. Du said, he can slowly accumulate his anger in his heart and then burst it out all at once. He actually used this characteristic to release his emotions and suppress his sleepiness. From this point of view, Xiaoxi should be thinking of killing with one blow. After all, this Jengar of Aji is obviously of the agile attack type. After 2 stages of strengthening, Infernape's attack may indeed defeat Jengar, whose defense is not that outstanding, with one blow. It's just a pity, Daigo on the side also said, and then turned his gaze to Jengar who was lying on the ground. Then, Jengar was seen standing up shakily. Chapter 80. The dark clouds on the ceiling were still dripping rain, but even such a cold and heavy rain could not wake up the sleeping Infernape. At this time, Xiaoxi, who was standing on the field, had a solemn expression, his brows were furrowed, and his eyes revealed deep worry. His clenched hands and tense shoulders showed his inner uneasiness and tension. He knew very well that after this trick failed, Infernape's efforts would be in vain. Jengar's Dream Eater skill also had the ability to restore physical strength. Sure enough, Aju, who was opposite to Xiaoxi, said, it seems that your plan has failed, Xiaoxi, Jengar uses Dream Eater. Jengar stood up and shook his head slightly uncomfortably, but then a shadow separated from him and rushed straight towards Infernape. Infernape, like Dragonite, immediately opened his eyes wide and trembled all over, as if he was enduring some pain. Seeing this, Xiaoxi couldn't help but yell to Infernape, Infernape, please wake up quickly, Infernape, Infernape. Just as Xiaoxi was shouting with all his might, he suddenly felt something strange about his body, but he didn't pay too much attention to it. But everyone at this moment, including Aju on the opposite side, seemed to have seen something strange, because at this moment, Xiaoxi actually emitted a trace of blue light, but he himself seemed not to notice it at all. What's going on? Is Xiaoxi going to be in trouble? Sunday, who had never seen such a scene before, couldn't help but ask worriedly. At this time, the knowledgeable Daigo and Wataru crossed their arms and thought carefully about something. Daigo said to Sunday, who looked worried, don't worry, Sunday, Satoshi's condition might be a good thing for him. Du couldn't help but mutter to himself, this power always feels similar to the dragon-controlling power of our dragon-controlling family, but it is also very different. What is this? On the other side, Xiao Yang, who knew very well what was going on, couldn't help but say excitedly, it seems that the wave power in Xiao Zhi's body has begun to awaken. Wave power. X3. Hearing Xiao Yang's words, the 3 of them couldn't help but turn their heads to look at each other. Seeing this, Xiao Yang nodded and said, to be honest, Xiaoxi is actually a wave hero. At the same time, the GS ball that Du had entrusted to other investigators in the Alliance for special safekeeping was trembling slightly, but because it was placed in a special sealed box for protection, no one noticed it. The same thing happened in Ash's room at the Pokémon Center. At this moment, his backpack was emitting a brilliant silver light. In a secret basement of the Toki Gym, a subordinate was running into a room in a hurry. After he came in, he said respectfully to a middle-aged man sitting on the sofa, Boss Sakeke, we have once again discovered the energy fluctuations of 2 legendary Pokémon, and we found them in the Dasha Valley. However, unlike before, the reaction this time is quite intense. At this time, Ban Mu, who was silently stroking the cat boss beside him, couldn't help but stop what he was doing, turned around and looked at the purple-haired girl standing beside him, and said, if I remember correctly, it seems that Hera has been sent to Dasha Valley. At this moment, Minoru couldn't help but break out in a cold sweat on his forehead, but he still said respectfully to Itaki, I'm very sorry, Boss Itaki. Actually, due to the negligence of our intelligence personnel, we didn't expect that the former champion of the home league, Daigo, would appear in Dashatani. Hera has been captured by the people of the league now. After hearing Manito's report, Banmu's face turned gloomy. Why did you tell me such an important thing only now? Monitori bowed slightly to Banmu and said, please rest assured, boss. I have arranged Hermes and others to handle this matter. I believe it won't be long before Hera is rescued. By then we will be able to understand the situation in Dasha Valley. Originally, Lord Apollo and Lord Zeus felt that this kind of thing did not need to alarm you. At this point, he couldn't help but pause, and then continued, after all, even if what we want falls into the hands of the Alliance, we can still get it out with the actions we are about to take. After hearing what Monitori said, Banmu did not pursue the matter further, but said, tell Hermes to act quickly. After all, besides us, I always feel that there are other forces hiding in the dark, spying on these legendary things. Hearing Banmu's words, Mantori couldn't help but ask cautiously, boss, are you referring to the incident that happened 10 years ago? Hearing Minora's question, Banmu couldn't help but stand up and look outside the door. He paused for a long time before speaking. The mysterious organization 10 years ago, relying on the legendary object in their hands, launched an attack on the headquarters of the Alliance. Although it was eventually successfully pacified, it was not completely eliminated. At this point, Banmu sighed silently, then opened his hands and continued, the goal of that organization is the same as our Team Rocket, which is to rule the world. At the beginning, they successfully hit the Alliance hard with only 5 legendary objects. This caused this matter to become a sensation, and it took the Alliance nearly 10 years to suppress it. Then, Banmu turned to look at Monitori and said, do you know why they lost in the first place? In response to Itaki's question, Monitori bowed and replied, my guess is that it is because their preparations are not sufficient, and the overall quality of the legendary objects is insufficient. In response to Manabu's statement, Banmu nodded and said, I'm afraid they didn't expect that the Alliance also has legendary items that belong to them. In addition, the power of other members is stronger than theirs, and they are too immature in command, and they are not outstanding trainers. In that case, it seems that there is nothing for us to worry about. Now we have a deep understanding of the current strength of the Alliance, and that guy has already succeeded in getting it. When the time comes, as long as we get a few more legendary objects, we don't need to be afraid of any force anymore, Minori asked in confusion. In response, Banmu shook his head and said, don't you find it strange? How could such a group of weak rabble easily find and control the legendary object? What do you mean? Banmu narrowed his eyes slightly and said, there must be a bigger shadow behind them. At the same time, on the Iron Island in the Sinnoh region, in an abandoned mine, a group of people were sitting around a huge table, discussing something intensely. At this moment, the leader suddenly interrupted and said, be quiet. The conference hall, which was originally as noisy as a vegetable market, suddenly became quiet. Let's ignore the newly appeared legendary items for now. After that incident, we were seriously injured and have not fully recovered yet. But we really can't indulge in it any longer. From now on, everyone, get moving. No matter what method we use, we must collect more legendary items. Next, follow my orders. After giving orders to others, everyone dispersed one by one, leaving only the leader who had just given the orders. At this moment, he was looking at a black wing filled with the aura of death and a turbid crystal in his hand, wondering what he was thinking about. Chapter 81. Infernape felt as if he was in a chaotic darkness. He kept wandering in this dark place, but for some reason, he should have been very angry, but he couldn't feel any anger at all. But then, he seemed to hear someone shouting, and looked up involuntarily. Then, he found that a ray of light suddenly appeared above the darkness, and as the light continued to grow brighter, Infernape clearly heard a familiar shout. It was a voice that he was very familiar with. As the light continued to grow brighter, the anger in his body once again surged out from his body and continued to grow. At this moment, on the field, everyone was looking at Infernape lying on the ground in surprise. His whole body was emitting dazzling white light. This can't be, Zai said somewhat incoherently. Everyone in the audience was stunned by this sudden scene, and saw the figure bathed in the dazzling light began to change. First, its hair continued to grow wildly, and then the black iron ring that bound its body began to crack. When the light dispersed, the original Infernape had disappeared, and in its place was a new Pokémon covered with grey-white hair. He seemed to have broken free from the constraints of his flesh and was floating in the air like a ghost. The abandoned monkey, who had successfully evolved, couldn't help but raise his palm and clenched his fist. A ghostly energy gathered in his fist, and then he swung it forward violently. A fierce sound of breaking through the air resounded across the field, and even Aju on the opposite side felt a strong whirlwind. Is this an evolution? But I remember that Infernape clearly doesn't have an evolved form, Sunday said in disbelief. No, Xiao Yang shook his head and said, Infernape actually has an evolved form. This Pokémon is called Forsaken. But the problem is, although I know that Infernape can evolve into Forsaken, it also requires special conditions. Xiaoxi's Infernape doesn't seem to meet that condition. How did it evolve? Xiao Yang couldn't help scratching his head and said with some confusion, according to the game, Infernape needs to use 20 fists of angry before it can evolve into Ragnarok, which is the move that Ragnarok just used, but Xiaoxi's original Infernape cannot use Rage Fist. The one who answered Xiao Yang's question was Daigo, who had traveled to many places and had a broader knowledge. He said to Xiao Yang, I think what you are talking about is the number of times the Fist of Wrath is used. I have also heard about the evolved form of Infernape, so I actually have a guess. Daigo held up a finger and said, the Fist of Fury is a move that becomes more powerful as the damage it takes increases. Don't you think that this method is like accumulating and releasing one's own anger? What do you mean? After hearing Daigo's words, Xiao Yang seemed to understand something, but he hadn't figured out the key point yet, so he couldn't help but look up at the other party. It has been introduced in the encyclopedia that Forsaken is a Pokémon that evolved when Infernape's rage value reached a critical point and it gained the power to break free from the constraints of the flesh. In other words, the key lies in accumulating its own rage value. I see. Xiaoxi's Infernape can store up its own anger, so. At this moment, Xiaoxi, who was standing on the field, felt that he was in a very mysterious stage. He could clearly feel the presence of people around him. In addition, strange lines extended from his body, connecting his Pokeball, the Forsaken candidate on the field, and Pikachu in the distant audience seats. At the same time, there were two lines extending very far, so far that they could not be sensed at all, but he was very clear that the two lines connected the Charizard who was training on Lanling Island and the frog who was still with Mr. Lei Si. Pikachu in the audience seemed to sense something and stared at Xiaoxi, who had his eyes closed as if he was resting. When Xiaoxi opened his eyes again, he felt that he had a deep understanding of the abandoned monkey in front of him. Monkey King seemed to sense something as well. He glanced at Xiaoxi, nodded at him, then turned to look at Gengar opposite him. Xiaoxi also looked at a Jian with burning eyes. The heavy rain had stopped at this time, but there were still some puddles left on the field. Sorry, Mr. Aju, I've kept you waiting for so long. Let's continue. Aju nodded upon seeing this, but at this time he was already fully alert, because he could clearly feel that the momentum between Xiaoxi and Monkey King had become completely different. It's easy to understand the abandoned monkey, because he has successfully reached the peak of the Quasi King, but Xiaoxi. He stared at Xiaoxi with vigilance, as if he had been reborn. Although he was smiling, there was an indescribable sense of oppression in him, a feeling he had only seen in elite-level trainers of the same level. Come on, Forsaken Monkey, use the Flame Fist. Flames burned on the fists of the Forsaken Monkey. He took light steps and approached Gengar quickly. Gengui, use Shadow Attack. Seeing this, Xiaoxi immediately shouted to the Forsaken, Forsaken, use Shadow Fist. Monkey immediately threw two shadow punches towards the sky, and at the moment when Gengar appeared behind Monkey, the shadow punch suddenly changed direction, passed by Monkey, and hit Gengar directly, causing considerable damage to it. Now is the time, abandoned monkey, use the Fist of Wrath. A dark purple ghost energy emerged from the fist of the Forsaken monkey, and then he used his left foot as a support point to quickly spin his body. Using the force of the rotation, he once again hit Gengar's abdomen with his angry fist, knocking him away. Gengar couldn't help but scream, then fell heavily to the ground, his eyes turned into whirlpool shapes. Great, Ash wins. Pick up. Bye. Looking at Gengar who had completely lost his ability to fight, Sunday couldn't help but say happily. Pikachu also waved his hands and feet happily, but then he successfully tore his wound and fell directly to the ground, twitching in pain. Xiao Yang couldn't help but clap his hands excitedly and said, in this case, Aegeon only has one Pokémon left, and Ash has 3 in total, including the almost full state Forsaken. The advantage is completely on Ash's side. No, that's not necessarily true, Du on the side said at this moment. Xiao Yang looked at him with some doubt and asked, will Mr. Aju use a king-level Pokémon next? Apart from this, Xiao Yang really couldn't think of any other possibilities, but even if that were the case, he still didn't think Zai would lose. However, Du still shook his head, looked at Aji on the field, and said, Aji will definitely only use Pokémon at the Quasi-King level in the future. However, his true strength as a trainer has not been shown yet. You just have to watch carefully to see Aji's true strength. Chapter 82. On the field, Aji took out the Pokeball and picked up the fallen Jengar. Then he looked at Zai and said, I have to say, Zai, you are the most amazing trainer I have ever seen. He said with a smile, actually, I had heard Minjai talk about you before I came here. Tomorrow night. Hearing this familiar yet distant name, Zai couldn't help but say, come to think of it, he did say that he was Mr. Aju's disciple. Did he mention me to you, Minjai? Aju nodded and said, he said that when he was chasing a gang of thieves, he met a very rash and reckless man. Hearing the other party say this, Zai scratched his head a little embarrassedly, recalling what he did when he first set out. Then Aju changed the subject, but he also mentioned to me that you are a person with great potential. You might be a strong opponent in the upcoming Quartz Conference. For this reason, he even went to Silver Mountain to strengthen his training. Is it? After hearing what Aju said, Zai reached out to adjust his hat, then showed an excited expression and said to Aju, I will definitely challenge the Quartz Conference and will win the championship. If Mr. Aju sees him at that time, please tell him, don't fall down before he meets me. Ha ha ha. Hearing what Zai said, Aju also laughed out loud, but there was no trace of mockery in his tone. I will deliver your words truthfully, but before that, you need to get my badge. Immediately afterwards, Aju took out a black and yellow Pokeball, and when Du saw that special Pokeball, his face changed immediately. Isn't he going to use that one? Oh no, everyone, cover your noses quickly. X3. Pick up. Compare. Before anyone could react, Du took out a piece of white cloth from somewhere and covered his mouth and nose with it. Aju also threw the advanced ball in his hand out. The Pokémon inside instantly turned into white light and came to the field at the moment the advanced ball was opened, but the white light on his body had not dissipated yet, and a foul smell instantly filled the entire field. What is this? It stinks. Sunday quickly covered his nose with his hand and looked at the venue with a frown. The other people in the audience also felt very uncomfortable. Even Du, who had made preparations in advance, also had a frown on his face. There's only one Pokémon I can think of that has a poison attribute and has such a bad smell the moment it appears. Daigo pinched his nose and his tone of voice changed a little. Xiao Yang also covered his mouth and nose with clothes with difficulty, and said with some difficulty breathing, is it, stinky mud? No wonder, we need a high-level ball. Skin. By Diao. Pidgeot stretched out one of his wings to cover half of his face, while Pikachu on the other side was already foaming at the mouth. There was nothing he could do because his nose was too sensitive, and the stench that went straight to his head made him dizzy. Everyone in the audience was like this, not to mention Zai and Monkey standing on the field. Especially the abandoned monkey, just by looking at his nose you can tell that his sense of smell is quite sensitive. At this moment, his hair stood up, veins popped out all over his body, one hand was tightly covering his nose, and his body was a little shaky, as if he would fall down soon. Zai also covered his nose with his clothes, but what surprised him was that Aju on the opposite side was not hurt at all. As if seeing the confusion in Zaidu's eyes, Aju said to Zai, I have been getting along with Stinky Mud for quite a while. At first, I was just like you guys and couldn't stand it, but after spending a long time together, I gradually got used to it. His stench can no longer affect me at all. Hearing each other's words, everyone in the audience as well as Zai and Monkey King on the field couldn't help but give each other a thumbs up. At this moment, everyone had only one thought in their mind, you are such a warrior. Xiao Yang, who covered his mouth and nose, couldn't help but complain, is this a ninja? He is really patient. Everyone nodded in agreement. But it's not easy to deal with the stinking smell here. Chaochu and I, try to cover up the smell as much as possible, Aju suddenly said to Chaochu and I. At this time, Stinky Mud, who had appeared on the field, also nodded. Then his body, which was like purple mud, suddenly began to swell, as if absorbing something from the outside. The people in the audience and Zai on the field felt that the stench around them began to decrease significantly. Although there was still a little odor left, at least everyone did not need to cover their noses anymore and could not breathe freely. But even so, the abandoned monkey standing on the field still frowned. It seems that a lot of the stench on the field still remains, Xiao Yang said, looking at the abandoned monkey's frowning brows. Sunday smiled bitterly and said, at least it's better than being knocked unconscious and losing the ability to fight. Although there's still a bit of a stench left, we're still going to go for it, abandoned monkey. After hearing what Zai said, Monkey put down his other hand that was covering his nose, focused his attention on looking at Mukthi, and nodded. Let's go. Forsaken Monkey uses the absorbing fist. A tremendous amount of fighting energy immediately gathered in the fist of the abandoned monkey, and then he rushed towards the stinky mud like an arrow. However, the moment he got close to the stinky mud, his nose twitched slightly, and the rapid momentum suddenly slowed down. What's wrong with you? Abandoned monkey. Zai couldn't help but be shocked when he saw this. He had never seen a bad-tempered Forsaken before, and his attacks would become slow. And Aju did not miss this opportunity, and immediately gave an order to Chao Chu Ni, hold him like this. Hearing Aju's order, Chao Chu Ni also moved. He first swelled his body, and then as if he had eaten the rubber fruit, his hands began to stretch out and tightly wrapped around the abandoned monkey, who had failed to successfully use the absorbing punch. Then, he just stuck his entire body to the abandoned monkey. The slime-like body of Stinky Mud was not only very soft, but also stuck to the abandoned monkey like glue. Even if the monkey struggled hard, it couldn't break free. If it were just that, it would be fine, but what made abandoned monkey feel even more uncomfortable was the stench that hit him in the face, making him see stars, and he felt like he might faint at any time. Chapter 83, What about the novice protection period? Looking at the Forsaken monkey struggling hard on the field, Xiao Yang couldn't help but say, Mr. Aju's Stinky Mud not only uses the characteristic of stench to the extreme, but also cleverly uses its own body structure. It is obviously only at the peak of the Quasi-King level, but it can show strength that is not inferior to the King level. It's really amazing. In response to Xiaoyang's admiration, Du on the side said, Aju's Stinky Mud has undergone special training and a lot of resources have been invested in it. It seems that he wants to train it into his first-tier combat force. At this time, Zai, who was standing on the field, also had a serious expression on his face, and said to Monkey King, use your fire fist quickly. The abandoned monkey, who was struggling hard, also opened his eyes, gathered fire energy in his fists, and then the scorching flames attached to his fists. He then swung it upwards and punched the stinky mud that was stuck to him. The scorching flames attached to Chao Chu Mud's body, causing him to cry out in pain, but even so, he still kept his eyes closed and clung tightly to abandoned monkey. In that case, use Shadow Fist. Zai gave the order again, but it was obvious that Aju on the other side would not remain indifferent. Smelly Mud uses Thief first, then Poison. Just when the Forsaken had gathered ghost energy in his fists, he felt a heavy blow to his abdomen. Then, he felt that something that Zai had specially hidden in his hair was taken away. Just when he was about to condense ghost energy once again, he suddenly felt a sharp pain all over his body. Then, he clearly felt his weakness, and a hint of light purple appeared on his cheeks. It was obvious that he had been poisoned. Abandoned World Monkey. Smelly, throw him away, then use Burp. After hearing Aju's command, Jojo Mud first used his body to stick to Abandoned Monkey's hands, then stood up and threw him out. While Abandoned Monkey was still in mid-air, Jojo Mud took out the peach fruit he had obtained from the other party and ate it directly. Then, hiccup. I saw Jojo Ni open his mouth wide and burp loudly. Then a purple halo came out of his mouth and hit the abandoned monkey who was still in the air, causing a huge explosion. The abandoned monkey was blown away again by this force and fell heavily to the ground. When everyone looked over again, the opponent had already lost his ability to fight. Xiao Yang, who saw this scene, couldn't help but mutter to himself, oh my goodness, the abandoned monkey has just evolved, and it doesn't even have a novice protection period, and it was knocked down like this. Du crossed his arms, shook his head and said, the peach fruit that Zai prepared to deal with Aju, but ended up making things easier for the opponent. After all, it's so easy to predict. It's not uncommon to prepare peach fruits and the like to deal with poison masters. We had this concern when we made the plan, but there was really no better way. We didn't expect that there would be no chance at all, Xiao Yang sighed helplessly. This mook is really well trained. Even a steel-type Pokémon would have a hard time facing him. If he trains better and reaches the king level, he will definitely be a powerful combat force, Daigo said silently as he looked at the mook on the field. Sunday looked at Xiaozai with a worried look on his face and said, Xiaozai now only has Infernape and Lizard. The two Pokémon don't seem to have much advantage against Mucky, especially Lizard. Most of his attacks may not work. If Infernape can't defeat Mucky, Xiaozai may have to. Xiao Yang nodded silently at Sunday's words, but then shook his head and said, not only that, Lizard and Infernape are only high-level and mid-level Pokémon of the Quasi-King level. Compared with the peak Quasi-King level Mud, there is still a big gap, but it is not without a chance of winning. Xiao Yang looked at Xiao Ji who had a serious expression on his face, and thought to himself, if Infernape's Super Inferno could be unleashed, or if Xiao Ji could fight against the opponent with reverse attributes. Come to think of it, I don't think I've ever seen Xiaozai use the reverse attribute to fight in this world, and I don't know to what extent he can exert his ability as the master of reverse attribute in the original work. Ash looked at Muddy Slime, then took out his next Pokeball. Please, Infernape. After a burst of white light, Infernape made a brilliant appearance, looking at the Muddy Slime across from him with excitement. After all, he had never challenged a gym since his debut with Satoshi, and he and Lizardman had been waiting for a long time. Infernape, don't get close to Mudcup next time. His body is very difficult to deal with, Xiaozai reminded. Infernape also nodded at the other party. Although he was inside the Pokeball, he could still feel the movements outside and knew how his good friend Infernape was defeated. Oh no, now it should be said that it was Infernape that was defeated. Come on, Infernape uses Flame Jet. The fire monkey's belly immediately swelled up, and then a stream of burning flames spurted out of his mouth. Smelly uses Shadow Clone. Xiaozai is very familiar with the Shadow Clone move. It is the most commonly used skill by the opponents he has encountered since his debut, and the way to deal with it is also quite simple and crude. Infernape, sweep the whole place with your jet of flames. While the Infernape was spraying flames, it was spinning its body to sweep away all the stinky mud around it. But the familiar scene appeared again. When there was only one muddy slug left on the scene, Infernape immediately spit out flames again, and the last muddy slug also dissipated. When Xiaozai saw this scene, his pupils shrank immediately, and he immediately shouted to Infernape anxiously, Infernape, use the dig method to get out of there quickly. Hearing Xiaozai's order, Infernape jumped up without saying a word and wanted to use the digging move, but then a figure next to it suddenly enlarged, and Aju's voice was heard. Go ahead, Stinky Mud, tangle him up. Suddenly, the Stinky Mud appeared, stretched out its hands, wrapped around the legs of the infernal monkey, and then pulled it in. Woogie! Except for the head, the entire body of the fire monkey was embedded in the body of the smelly mud. Chapter 84. How could it be? Sunday couldn't help but speak in surprise. Pick up. And Pikachu, who had regained consciousness at some point, spoke in surprise and looked at Xiaozai with concern. At this moment, the fire monkey was like Monkey King who was thrown into the Five-Finger Mountain, with only his head left outside and his entire body tightly suppressed by the stinky mud. This time it's not a sneak attack, but shrinking. Daigo, who was standing by, immediately saw the method used by Chaochu Mud. Xiao Yang also sighed and said, Xiao Ji doesn't have a good memory. He has used it before, but he didn't take precautions. This is troublesome. Infernape, use Flame Jet. Hearing what Xiaozai said, Infernape immediately turned around and condensed flames in its mouth. But then Aju took the lead and ordered, Jojo Ni, hold down his head. Stinky Mud immediately stretched out his stinky mud hands and pressed the fire monkey's head directly to the ground. At this moment, the fire monkey immediately experienced the same treatment that the abandoned monkey had received before. The stench that hit him went straight to the top of his head, and he felt his vision become extremely blurry. Thief, then use poison. The same trick, the same scene, was once again played on the Infernape. After being attacked by a thief and having his peach fruit taken away, Infernape screamed in pain as if venom was directly injected into his body. Fire monkey, wake up quickly. It seemed that because the wave power in his body had awakened, Zai's cry played a significant role, and Infernape woke up immediately, but even so, he still couldn't get rid of the extremely sticky body of Mukthi. Even if he used his skills to hit the opponent, it felt like he was stuck in soft cotton. It didn't have much effect at all. On the contrary, the more Infernape struggled, the tighter the mud would wrap around him. What should I do? Looking at the scene in front of him, a drop of cold sweat ran down Zai's forehead. Wooji! At this moment, the poison once again took effect on the fire monkey. He was swept by a purple light, and then a tingling sensation spread throughout his body, and he lost a lot of physical strength in an instant. Aju, who was watching this scene, nodded and said, "That's about it. Chaochu Ni, throw him out again and use burp." Stinky Mud used the same trick again. It first stuck to Infernape's hands, then wrapped around his body, released it instantly, and threw it out with force. Infernape swayed in the air like a kite with a broken string. Just when Muddy Squid ate the peach fruit and was about to use the burp again, Zai's eyes suddenly lit up, and he immediately shouted to Infernape, "Infernape, hurry up, take this opportunity to use the flame jet adjustment on the ground." In the air, Infernape, who originally had dull eyes, instantly perked up after hearing Zai's call. He immediately adjusted his body and used jet flame towards the ground. Just at this moment, Muddy's burp skill also followed. Infernape used the reverse thrust of jet flame to dodge the attack and avoided the same tragedy as Forsaken. The fire monkey flew higher into the sky, immediately adjusted its body, curled up its legs, hugged its body with both hands, and then rolled over quickly, spitting out flames from its mouth and using a flame wheel. Infernape crashed into the mudcup in front of it at a very fast speed. Mudcup was surprised that the opponent could counter-attack so quickly. He had no time to adjust and was immediately hit head-on by Infernape's flame wheel. After hitting the mud, Infernape did not continue to expand its victory, but immediately used the reaction force to retreat, because he knew very well that if he was entangled by the mud again, he would definitely be finished. Zai excitedly said to Infernape, who had retreated back, "You did a great job, Infernape." Even Aju in the front couldn't help but nodded and praised, "He has a strong combat awareness and can immediately counter-attack in that situation. It's really amazing." However, the other party then changed the subject and looked at the Infernape fiercely, "But do you still have enough energy to fight?" The fire monkey was indeed feeling uncomfortable at this time. He was seen kneeling on one knee with one eye tightly closed, his expression very painful. It seemed that the poison had a great impact on him. Seeing this, Zai also took out his poke ball, took back Infernape, and said, "You come back first, Infernape, and the rest will be left to the forest lizard." Looking at Zai who took Infernape back, Sunday said with some concern, "Now the only one who can fight is forest lizard, but it seems that the only skill of forest lizard that can work on Mook is the double hit." Xiao Yang nodded and said, "Indeed, but the most important thing is that the double slash is also a close-range skill. Once you are entangled by the stinky mud." Xiao Yang did not say anything else, but everyone present knew very well that once the forest lizard was entangled by the stinky mud again, its luck might not be as good as that of the Infernape, and Aju would definitely make preparations in advance. At this time, Zai, holding the poke ball belonging to the forest lizard in his hand, kept thinking in his mind what to do and how to deal with mud. Looking at the slime squirming in front of him, Zai fell into deep thought, and Aju on the opposite side did not intend to urge Zai. He seemed to want to see if Zai could come up with any good way to deal with his slime. At this moment, Zai closed his eyes tightly, his heart gradually sank, he seemed to have come to a dark place, and ripples kept appearing under his feet. Then, he suddenly seemed to have thought of something, opened his eyes instantly, and raised the corners of his mouth slightly. If that was the case, with the skills and speed of the forest lizard, maybe it could be done. Finally, he looked up at Aju and said with a hint of apology, but still with fighting spirit, "I'm sorry, Mr. Aju, I kept you waiting for a long time." Aju shook his head and said with a little interest, "It seems that you have thought of a solution. Come on, let me see what kind of miracles you can evoke." Zai stretched out his hand with the forest lizard's poke ball in his hand and said confidently, "Yes, we will definitely defeat Mr. Aju's mud and get the batch." Then he placed the poke ball on his forehead and said softly, "Forest lizard, I'll leave it to you from now on." The forest lizard in the poke ball also seemed to sense something, and nodded firmly to Ash outside, ready for battle. Then Zai suddenly opened his eyes and threw the Pokeball out. Chapter 85, The Collision of Defense and Speed. On the field, the forest lizard holding a branch in its mouth was staring at the stinky mud on the opposite side with a fierce look. The stinky mud was also staring at the opponent without giving in. An invisible momentum emerged on the field. Looking at the two Pokémon facing each other on the field, Xiao Yang couldn't help but say, "It's really a tense atmosphere." Sunday also nodded silently, looked at Zai intently, and said, "Next, it will be the final showdown. Infernape is in no condition to fight the next battle. If Forest Lizard falls again, then Zai will completely lose this gym battle." Seeing the two people's nervous expressions, Daigo smiled and said to them, all right, relax, don't be so nervous. Even if Zai really loses, there is no need to worry too much. In fact, judging from his current performance, he has already succeeded and reached the standard." And Du also nodded and said, "That's right, with Aju's personality, she has already recognized Zai." After hearing what the two said, Xiao Yang and Shende breathed a sigh of relief, but they still stared at the two people confronting each other on the field. Pikachu. Bye. Pikachu and Pidgeot, who were standing by, took two flags from somewhere and waved them gently, apparently cheering for Ash and the forest lizard. "Come on, Zai," Aju said to Zai who was looking at the opposite side, with a hint of excitement in his tone. "Let's go, forest lizard." Zai stretched out his hand, pointed forward, and said, "Use leaves." Xiao Yang, what? Sunday, leaves? Watery and Daigo? And Aju on the field also did not quite understand Zai's instruction. It was true that the forest lizard could use the skill of leaves, but this skill was a grass-type skill with extremely low power and basically could not cause any damage to mud. Normally, Pokémon that have reached a certain level of strength will no longer use the leaf skill. However, the forest lizard did not hesitate at all for Zai's words. The big leaf on its head stood up, and then countless leaves emitting green light gathered on it and flew towards the stinky mud in front. For such an attack, Aju just frowned slightly, but did not give any orders, and just let Chaochu take it. Countless leaves hit Chaochu, but his expression did not change at all. Such an attack was like being hit by a flying insect to him, and it did not hurt at all. Forest lizards don't stop, keep using leaves. The leaves emitting green light floated slowly in the air, just like countless green meteors moving slowly in the sky, brilliant and colorful, adding a touch of color to the originally solemn venue. Xiao Yang's eyes twitched as he watched the scene on the field, and he said uncertainly, "Xiaoji, is this considered a gorgeous performance contest?" Sunday also shook her head silently. She didn't understand the meaning of Zai's doing this. "No. That's not right. Look at the stinky mud." At this moment, Daigo suddenly spoke and pointed in the direction of Chaochu mud. Everyone looked in the direction he pointed and were surprised to find that some leaves began to stick to Chaochu mud's originally bare body. Aju, who was on the field, also noticed this. Although he didn't know what this could do, as a ninja, he instinctively sensed something was wrong and immediately shouted to Nicholas, "Nicholas, use the sludge bomb quickly." Stinky Mud opened his mouth and spat out particles of black and purple mud. Seeing this, Zai immediately instructed the forest lizard, "Forest lizard, use lightning flash to dodge the attack while getting close to the mud." The forest lizard instantly turned into white light, like a speeding motorcycle, and while moving quickly, it constantly adjusted its body, dodging the oncoming sludge bombs, and quickly approached the stinky mud. In just a blink of an eye, it came within 2 meters of the opponent. Use this opportunity now to use the double strike. 2 consecutive slashes? Zai, Muddy's body is. After hearing Zai's order, Aju finally couldn't help but open his mouth to remind him of the stickiness of the slime, but then his words stopped abruptly. Because the 2 leaves on the forest lizard's hands turned into 2 blue-purple sharp blades, which then hit the stinky mud directly, knocking it away, and its body was not stuck by the stinky mud. So that's what it's like. Daigo, who was watching this scene from the audience, was the first to speak up. It was because of the leaves. The leaves stuck to the slime successfully prevented the forest lizard from coming into direct contact with the slime. Du also said, in addition, there is also the double slash. If you use the blade to attack directly, not only will it destroy the leaves above, but you will also be stuck by the stinky mud. So I used the blade to hit it instead. Zai's idea is really wild. Xiaoyang rubbed his forehead helplessly and said, "Should I say that you are worthy of being Zai? You can even come up with such a method." Sunday nodded in agreement, stroking his chin and thinking, if I face Zai in the next quartz conference, how should I deal with his endless tricks? At this time, Zai didn't know that Sunday had already started thinking about how to deal with him, but excitedly said to the Forest Lizard, maintain the speed of lightning and use 2 consecutive slashes. AA. The Forest Lizard maintained its lightning speed and launched continuous fierce attacks on the Stinky Mud. As the opponent continued to attack, scars of varying sizes appeared on Stinky Mud's body. However, under such continuous attacks, some leaves would directly sink into Stinky Mud's body. Fortunately, the skill of using leaves consumes relatively little energy, and even if it is combined with Lightning Flash and Double Chop, there is no problem using the 3 skills together. Therefore, such a magical scene appeared on the field. A green figure wrapped in white energy was running fast on the field, with green leaves like a galaxy behind him. But it is obvious that Aju will not let Zai continue to fight like this. In that case, use Dissolve Slime. Upon hearing Aju's order, Chao Chuan's body immediately collapsed to the outside, as if it had melted, but then everyone noticed that his originally sticky body had become firmer. As Mud continued to use the dissolving skill, the damage caused to him by the Forest Lizard became smaller and smaller. However, the improvement in defense was ultimately limited. Although the damage was small, the accumulated damage made Mud feel very uncomfortable. But it was not that easy for the Forest Lizard. After all, it was extremely difficult for the Forest Lizard to maintain high speed and high attack. His speed began to slow down slowly, sweat began to flow from his body, and his breathing frequency began to become disordered. Chapter 86. This is truly the ultimate collision of speed and defense. Daigo said as he looked at the flying forest lizards, the flying leaves, and the slime that curled up its entire Pokémon. Looking at the scene off the field, Sunday asked a question, why didn't Mr. Aju continue to use the shadow clone and shrinking tactics to deal with the forest lizards like before? In response to Sunday's question, Du shook his head and said, this method can be used to deal with those who are not well prepared, or for a surprise attack, but Zai has suffered losses twice, so he will definitely be on guard. Moreover, with the current speed of the forest lizards, even if this trick is used, it will hardly be effective. Xiaoyang was somewhat hesitant about what Du said, but generally agreed with it. As for whether Zai was prepared or not, that was another matter. But judging from the current situation, even if this trick was used, it would not make much sense. After all, the skill of shrinking actually had certain flaws. First of all, this skill requires the Pokémon to shrink its body instantly, and then slowly change back, but it will be smaller than its original size. If the opponent is attacked before it changes back, it will definitely be seriously injured, because in that state, the defense will drop sharply. Judging from the current speed of the forest lizard, it is very likely to knock the opponent directly away. It would be fine if it was just a minor injury, but if it was knocked out of the venue, that would be a bit funny. After all, the league has a rule that a Pokémon that leaves the venue will be considered a loser even if it still has the ability to fight. At this moment, the forest lizard finally stopped, and leaves began to fall from the sky. He was gasping for breath on the spot, and sweat was constantly coming out of his body. It was obvious that he had reached his limit. And the stinky mud next to him also opened his body. At this time, his body was covered with scars and was almost covered by leaves. Now is the time for the slime to use the sludge bomb. Get out of the way, forest lizard. Stinky Mud paused for a moment, but still used the sludge bomb, but the forest lizard did not react so quickly. He just raised his leg and moved forward half a step, and he felt a strong sense of fatigue, which made his whole body stiff. Then he was hit directly by the sludge bomb and flew backwards. Forest lizard! Zai exclaimed in surprise. The forest lizard slid outward for a distance, but still gritted its teeth, supported itself with its hands, and stood up again, but its body was still a little shaky. Forest lizard! Zai looked at the other party with a worried look. The forest lizard also looked up at Zai, and at the moment their eyes met, Zai felt a strange power seem to emerge in his body. At this time, the forest lizard's eyes lit up, and then a natural breath emerged from him. The green light turned into a strange air, spreading all over the body of the forest lizard. That's Mao's Hung. Sunday said in surprise when he saw this scene. Its physical strength has reached its limit, so it has stimulated the forest lizard's last strength. Daigo said silently as he looked at the forest lizard on the field. Du also sat up straight, staring at the field intently. It seems that the next step is the final attack. Xiao Yang didn't say anything, but glanced at Zai Zai out of the corner of his eye and thought silently in his heart, I'm afraid it's not just lush. Okay, let's go, forest lizard, use your blade with all your strength. Is the final showdown coming? We won't lose, Muddy, use your strongest attack to knock us down. The forest lizard raised his hands, and the leaves on his arms turned into green blades, constantly accumulating grass-type energy, while Stinky Mud also stretched out his arms, and the terrifying evil-type energy gathered in his hands. The two sides looked at each other, and the forest lizard took the first step and rushed towards the Stinky Mud. However, due to the inconvenience of movement, the Stinky Mud stretched out his arms and used the knocking down skill fiercely. The blade and the palm met each other halfway, and the terrifying energy aura spread in all directions, and the two of them just stood there in a stalemate. Seeing this, Zai Zai couldn't help but shout, "Come on, forest lizard, use blade leaf." The forest lizard in the battle suddenly focused its eyes, and exerted force on the blade in its hand again, slowly suppressing the slapping skill of the Stinky Mud. "AA!" The forest lizard suddenly shouted and pushed away Mud's arm. Then it flashed forward as if it had teleported and came directly behind Mud. It maintained the posture of a knife leaf and just stood there quietly. Mud also maintained the same posture, frozen in place. The trainers from both sides and the spectators on the field stared at the scene in front of them, not daring to make a sound. Then, Jojo Mud suddenly and slowly retracted his arm, turned around slowly, glanced at the forest lizard, and then his whole body collapsed, and his eyes turned into whirlpool shapes. Win, Sunday swallowed hard and said uncertainly. Daigo and Watari seemed more relaxed, nodding silently at her and saying, "Yes, Satoshi won." Hearing the other party's words, Sunday couldn't help but let out a long sigh of relief and lay down directly on the chair. Xiao Yang at the side also heaved a long sigh of relief, then stood up and shouted to Xiaoji, "Hey! Xiaoji, what are you daydreaming about? Go check on the forest lizards, you guys beat the 4 heavenly kings." Even though the other party didn't try their best, the last sentence was said in a low voice. Zai Zai finally reacted and immediately ran towards the forest lizard. A smile appeared on his face unconsciously, and the excitement in his heart was simply difficult to conceal. The forest lizard also put away its stance and looked at Zai Zai, who was running over. It then just hugged both the man and the pet. Zai Zai said excitedly, "Well done, forest lizard." The forest lizard was also very happy. He was happy for himself. After all, he had defeated such a strong enemy, and he was also happy for Zai Zai, because he knew that Zai Zai was one step closer to his goal. Clap clap clap! At this moment, Aju, who had taken back the Stinky Mud, came over clapping his hands, looked at Zai Zai with admiration and said, "Well done, Zai Zai, Minjai was right about the person." Then he took out a pink heart-shaped badge from his arms and handed it to Zai Zai, saying to him, "Here, this is the proof that you defeated the Crimson Gem, the pink badge." "Thank you, Mr. Aju." Zai Zai reached out to take the badge, then excitedly held it up and shouted, "I got the pink badge." Pikachu. The forest lizard and Pikachu, who had arrived at some point, also cheered. Looking at the energetic Satoshi on the field, Daigo and Wataru in the audience couldn't help but smile at each other. Chapter 87. Request and Conversation. The 3 people who successfully completed the challenge and obtained the badges were now sitting in the room. There were no tables or chairs in the room, as these were all from the Kissed Zone. The rooms at the Pokémon Center are usually very crowded, so members of the same team, as long as they are under the age of 15, are usually crowded in the same room, regardless of gender. At this time, Sunday was sitting quietly in a window seat, his hands weakly supporting his cheeks, his eyes flickering as he looked at the table, not knowing what he was thinking about. Although he didn't say anything, the silent atmosphere made Zai Zai, who was always enthusiastic and cheerful, feel something was wrong. Xiao Yang and Zai Zai, who were sitting in front of her, looked at each other. They were sitting on the chairs at this time, their bodies were stiff, and their legs were shaking from time to time. The two of them kept communicating with each other with their eyes, although they didn't understand what the other meant. After all, they had never encountered such a scene before, and it was difficult to understand the meaning in each other's eyes. As for Pikachu and Pidgeot, Miss Joy arranged for them to rest. After all, they were still injured and needed further full-body examinations. There was no way they could fully recover in a short period of time. In the end, it was Zai who couldn't stand it anymore. He stretched out his hand and said to Sunday cautiously, "Sunday, you don't need to care so much. After all, you are facing the 4 heavenly kings. It's already very good to be able to achieve that level, and Mr. Aju also recognizes your strength." Xiao Yang also nodded in agreement and said, "That is to say, your performance is already quite good. Even though I successfully defeated Mr. Aju, I am already 17 years old after all, 5 years older than you, and I have 5 years more experience than you. When I was your age, my strength was far inferior to yours. With your potential, your future achievements are definitely limitless." At this point, he briefly recalled the scene of the Sunday battle, and said with a little sourness, "And Mr. Aju's tactics are really hard to evaluate." Yes, that's right. Although the 3 people present all got Aju's pink badge, the only ones who actually defeated Aju were Zai and Xiao Yang. The rules were exactly the same as before, and Xiao Yang actually performed better than Zai. He took out Venusaur, Catman, and Scyther in succession. It adopted a relatively rogue tactic at the beginning. It first let Bulbasaur continuously use hypnotic powder, and then used parasitic seeds to continuously consume Akihabara's double gas. After successfully hypnotizing and parasitizing the opponent, it immediately switched to Scyther. Relying on the skill of Slash, which can continuously stack damage, and Scyther's technical expert characteristics, it successfully killed the opponent's first Pokémon. As for the second one, Aju sent out Arbok, which successfully knocked down Xiaoyang's Scyther and Venusaur with the extremely trained Serpent's Stare. However, Venusaur still gave the opponent a parasitic seed before falling. Finally, Xiao Yang replaced it with the third Cat Boss. Although there was some level gap between the two sides, after Cat Boss used the provocation skill, he adopted the kite flying tactic, constantly consuming the opponent's physical strength, and finally succeeded in knocking down Arbok before he was exhausted. On the other hand, Sunday was not as lucky as the other two. The 2 Pokémon used by Akatsuki were Stomper and Mothra. At the beginning of the game, Aju used the rain-seeking skill of Poison Jellyfish to forcefully break Sunday's Sandstorm tactics, and then used the Mirror attribute to eliminate his own attribute disadvantage. Relying on the substitute Poison tactics that was even more disgusting than Xiao Yang, and the Rain Disc attribute, he defeated Sunday's 3 Pokémon one after another before being killed. The next Pokémon, Mothra, was even more powerful. With the help of the farmer's 3 powders, the immobilization technique to enhance interference, and the butterfly dance to enhance the killing, it only suffered minor injuries and took down the last 2 Pokémon of the Sunday. The Sunday could not control the fossil wyvern yet. Hearing their words, Sunday just sighed softly, shook his head at them, and said, "Although I do care about today's battle, I'm not thinking about this." "So what are you thinking about? If you have any difficulties, be sure to tell us and we will all help you," Zai said. Sunday looked at the other person with a hint of gratitude, turned his head to look out the window, and then said slowly, "Actually, I mainly feel that the gap between my strength and yours is getting bigger and bigger." Xiao Yang is okay, as he said, he has been traveling for 5 years, but even compared to Zai, I still have a lot of shortcomings. Hearing Shendai's words, Xiaoyang's eyes twitched involuntarily. "Although what I said was indeed correct, you don't have to say it so directly. Where are your manners as a young lady from a wealthy family?" Sunday didn't care about Xiaoyang's thoughts, but continued, "My reaction and adaptability when facing emergencies are still far from enough, and my strongest Pokémon at the moment is Sandslip, but it only has the strength of a Quasi-King advanced level. Even if I want to make it into the top 32 of the league, I'm afraid it will be very difficult." At this point, she couldn't help but smile bitterly. "I originally thought that since I had trained in the secret realm, even if there was a gap in strength compared to yours, you shouldn't be too far behind, but I didn't expect." Then, she suddenly turned to look at Zai and the others, and said in a firm tone, "So, please help me next time, whether it's adaptability, commandability, or something else." Looking at the other party's determined eyes, Zai immediately stood up and said confidently, "Don't worry, Sunday, we will definitely help you. I believe that with your talent, Sunday, you will definitely become the runner-up of the conference." Hearing Zai's words, Sunday raised his eyebrows slightly, but then seemed to understand Zai Zai's meaning, and asked with a slight smile in his tone, I am the runner-up of the tournament, so who should be the champion? Zai Zai immediately stretched out his hand, pointed his thumb at himself, and said confidently, the champion is of course me. Hearing what Zai Zai said, Sunday covered his mouth with the back of his hand and laughed out loud, smiling charmingly. After laughing for a while, he gently wiped the tears from the corners of his eyes with his hands, then rolled his eyes at Zai Zai and said, I think you'd better not say too much, otherwise you may not even be able to make it into the top 32. When Zai Zai heard what Sunday said, he immediately jumped up and said, how is that possible? I want to become a Pokémon master. Seeing the two of them like this, Xiao Yang, who felt completely ignored, finally couldn't help but pat the table with his hand, and then said, I say, aren't you a little too arrogant? The real candidate for the championship is still here. After hearing Xiao Yang's words, Sendai and Zai Zai looked at each other, and then, ha 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 ha. Seeing the two of them like this, Xiao Yang couldn't help but twitch his lips. It would have been fine if Sunday was covering his mouth and laughing secretly, but Zai Zai actually just lay on the chair and laughed out loud. You guys are going too far. Can you still have fun? Chapter 88. Queen? Okay, stop laughing and let's think about the next question first, Sunday suggested, holding his stomach and waving at them. Zai Zai and Xiao Yang looked at each other in confusion, then turned around and asked in confusion, what's the problem? Seeing them like this, Sunday couldn't help but stroke his forehead. Zai Zai is fine, but why is Xiao Yang so speechless? You usually act quite calm, is that just an act? Now you are relaxed. Then she rolled her eyes at the two of them, and said, have you forgotten? Judging from the current condition of Pikachu and Pidgeot, they need to recuperate in the Pokémon Center for at least a month. During this period, what should we do with our gym battles? Should we just leave them in the Pokémon Center, or should we entrust them to someone else? After hearing what Sunday said, they both fell silent and rested their chins on their hands, thinking. As Sunday said, they don't have much time left, and it is impossible for them to stay and take care of Pikachu and the others until they fully recover. Now they have to race against time. Thinking of this, Xiao Yang couldn't help but look at Xiao Ji, and after thinking for a moment, he asked him, what do you think, Xiao Ji, about separating from Pikachu? Hearing Xiao Yang's words, Xiao Ji's body stiffened for a moment, but then he breathed a sigh of relief and said, I've already prepared myself mentally for this. Pikachu and the others must stay and receive proper treatment. Even if they are not at the Pokémon Center, we should provide them with a better environment for healing. Anyway, they will only be away for a little over a month. Seeing Zai Zai say this, Sunday also said, in that case, why don't we arrange for them to stay in my special nursing home? The environment there is very comfortable, and there are specialized doctors and breeders. They will definitely get the best treatment. After hearing Shendai's suggestion, the two looked at each other, and then Xiao Yang said silently, if that's the case, then it seems possible. Before Xiao Yang could finish his words, there was a knock on the door of the room, and then a gentle voice came from outside the door, excuse me, is Mr. Zai Zai in there? There is a call for you. The three of them immediately recognized that it was Miss Joy's voice and couldn't help but look at each other. Phone. Is it Mom calling? Half an hour later. Crack. The door of the room was opened. The two people who were sitting on the bed and doing nothing couldn't help but turn their heads to look outside the door. The person who walked in was Zai Zai, who had just gone to answer the phone. He glanced at the two of them, touched his head, and then said, it was indeed my mother who called just now. She seemed to know what happened in Dasha Valley, so she came to ask about my situation. I also told her some of our current situation, and then she offered to help us take care of Pikachu and Pidgeot. What do you think, Xiao Yang? After hearing Zai Zai's words, Xiao Yang took a while to understand what Zai Zai meant. Are you saying that Aunt Hanako is going to help us take care of the injured Pikachu and Pidgeot? Zai Zai nodded gently and said, she said she has nothing to do at the moment, so she has enough time to help us take care of them. Nothing to do? Zai Zai's words directly caught Xiao Yang's attention. Xiao Yang, who often took advantage of Zai Zai for free food and drinks, knew very well that although Zai Zai had greatly improved the Pokémon's meals through his own efforts, it was still a bit difficult for Zai Zai to make his current Pokémon live so well with the funds he had obtained. The reason why he was able to do this was partly because he relied on the monthly living expenses provided by his mother. Hanako, who was able to do such a thing, should have a relatively high-paying job, but according to Zai, the other party did not have anything to do. This is really thought-provoking. Although he had thought about whether Hanako's identity was unusual after seeing the notebook before, he also considered that it might have been given by Professor Oak, because the two people seemed to have some relationship in the original work, so it is not impossible in this world. Therefore, he did not rush to draw a conclusion. But now it seems that my previous guess was correct. Thinking of this, he nodded to Zai and said, if Aunt Hanako is free, it would be best for her to take care of the children. Then we can rest assured, and Pikachu and Pidgeot should agree. Hearing Xiao Yang say this, Zai nodded and said, okay, I got it. We'll go and tell them later. Hey, what's wrong with you? Sunday. At this time, Zai found that Sunday's expression was a little strange. There was a hint of uneasiness in her eyes. She subconsciously grabbed the hem of her skirt with both hands, her brows slightly frowned, and she was muttering something silently. Her eyes moved left and right from time to time, as if looking for something. Hey! Oh, I'm fine. After hearing what Zai said, Sunday seemed a little flustered and his eyes unconsciously moved away. Seeing the other party's look, Xiao Yang immediately understood something and couldn't help but reveal an expression of watching a good show. He turned to Zai and said, I think Sunday is about to meet the queen, so she is a little nervous. Queen? Zai was a little confused by Xiaoyang's words, and wondered, could it be that Shende was about to meet the queen of a certain country? After all, Zai also knew that there were actually some kingdoms in this world, and there were naturally so-called kings, queens, princes, and princesses in kingdoms. And considering Shende's family background, it seemed reasonable to meet such a person. After figuring this out, Zai said to Sunday, Sunday, are you going to meet the queen of a certain country next? If so, don't worry too much. Xiao Yang and I will do our best to help you then. Puchi, ha 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 ha, yes, that's right, Zai and I will definitely help you, ha ha ha. After hearing what Zai said, Xiao Yang finally couldn't help laughing out loud. Sunday's face was already red to her ears. She glared at Xiao Yang fiercely, and the other party glared back without showing any weakness. Haha, you made fun of me just now, little girl, you are still too naive. Then, he asked Zai, Aunt Hanako, will you come tomorrow? Ah? Of course not. There's still some distance between us and you. I've talked to Mom about it. We will talk to Miss Joy first. She will come here to pick up Pikachu and the others in about 7 days. We can't delay any longer. We have to set off the day after tomorrow at the latest. What? After hearing what Zai said, Sunday also breathed a sigh of relief, but before she could completely relax, Zai's next words came again. But she did tell me that she hopes you, Sunday, can go to Pallet Town before the Quartz Conference opens. She said she wants to meet you. Oh, of course, Xiao Yang, you have to come too, but I don't know why, she mainly mentioned Sunday. Oh, I understand. Please tell Aunt Hanako that I will definitely go there. Hearing this, Xiao Yang became proud again and couldn't help but slap his thigh and said. As for Sunday, she simply lowered her head, and her expression could not be seen at all. One could only hear her say in a soft voice, okay, I got it. Tell my aunt, I will go. Looking at the two of them like this, Zai couldn't help but scratch his head in surprise. Is there anything wrong with what I said? Chapter 89. New Companion. In the Pokémon Center, Ash and Yang are saying goodbye to Pikachu and the others. Sorry, Pikachu, I have to leave you here alone, Zai said to the yellow mouse covered in bandages in front of him with a little apology. Pika. Pikachu, on the other hand, shook his head gently, then stretched out his hand, clenched it, and pointed it at Zai. Zai immediately understood what he meant, and also stretched out his fist to bump his little fist against his. The man and his pet looked at each other and smiled. Without much communication, what they wanted to convey to each other had been achieved. Then, Pikachu turned to look at Monkey King and the others and started talking to them directly. Seeing this, Ash also walked away silently. Although he didn't know what they would talk about specifically, Ash could guess that it was probably about him. The situation on Xiaoyang's side was a little different. He did not release all the Pokémon. Instead, he just sat on the bed with one Pokémon, looking out the window silently. When it felt like it was about time, Xiao Yang turned around, reached out and patted Pidgeot, saying, "You must rest well, because we will challenge the alliance in the future." Pidgeot also nodded silently, with a gleam in his eyes. As an old partner who has been together for 5 years, he knew very well what his master wanted to express. On a bench outside the Pokémon Center, Sunday was looking down at the Pokeball in his hand. Then, he suddenly looked up at the sky, muttering to himself, "I really need to master this power as soon as possible, otherwise with my current strength, I'm afraid." "Hey! Sunday!" Just then, she heard Zai's call and turned around to look. She found that he and Xiao Yang were waving at her. Seeing this, she put away the Pokeball in her hand and slowly walked over. "Have you said your goodbyes and explained everything?" Shende walked forward and asked the two. They looked at each other, then nodded together and said, "Don't worry, everything has been arranged." Hearing them say this, Sunday nodded and said, "In that case, let's go quickly. Mr. Keith is still waiting in the car." "Wait a minute, Zai, Xiao Yang and Sunday." Just as they were about to leave, a voice suddenly came from behind and called them. The three of them turned their heads together and found that Wattery was waving at them, with Daigo and Aju standing beside him. Seeing this, the three of them looked at each other and walked over. "Mr. Du, is there anything else?" Zai asked Du curiously. Du nodded at them and said, "Actually, a younger generation in my family is planning to find a few friends to travel together. He is challenging the Quartz Conference just like you. I wonder if you are willing to be his companion and travel together." After hearing what Du said, before Xiao Yang and Sunday could speak, Zai immediately said excitedly, "Do you have new companions who want to travel together?" "Of course. The more people traveling, the better. It should be no problem, Xiao Yang, Sunday." Seeing the other party looking at him with shining eyes, Xiao Yang could only sigh helplessly and said, "You have already agreed on our behalf, do we have any other choice? It's just one more person anyway." Sunday also nodded and said, "Since you all have no objections, I naturally won't say anything." "That's great. Just wait a little longer. I think he will be here soon." Seeing that Zai and the others agreed, Du nodded. "But, are they from the Yulong family?" Xiao Yang touched his chin and thought for a moment. Then, a somewhat complicated figure suddenly appeared in his mind and the corner of his eyes twitched slightly. "No, it can't be such a coincidence, right? Here I come, cousin." Then, a voice that sounded familiar to the three people present sounded behind them. Immediately afterwards, a strong whirlwind blew through everyone, making their clothes rustle violently. Zai and Sunday looked in the direction of the sound, while Xiaoyang's mouth twitched. He turned around with a stiff body and saw the unforgettable figure. He had the same red hair as Wattery, and one could tell from his appearance that he was a very outgoing person. He was currently sitting on a garcomp, waving at everyone. "What? You are, Yuan?" "Xiao Yang." "That's right, the person who came was Yulongai Yuan who had appeared in the Pokémon school." When he saw the three familiar figures, he immediately jumped off Garcomp's body and flew over directly. "Hey, isn't this Yang, Zai and, oh, right, Sunday." Yulong Yuan immediately said the names of Xiao Yang and Zai, but when it came to Sunday, he thought for a while before remembering them. Seeing that the other party took so long to remember him, Shende said with some displeasure, "Do you know that this is very rude of you?" Yulong Yuan scratched his head embarrassedly and said, Sorry. Seeing the other party like this, Du behind him touched his head with a headache, and then said to Zai and the others, "It seems that you seem to know each other? If so, it's really great. He is the person I told you about, who will travel with you next." "Hey! Yuan wants to travel with us? That's great. By the way, Xiao Yang, do you know Yuan?" Hearing that Yulong Yuan would travel with them next, Zai couldn't help but say excitedly, but then he realized that Xiao Yang also knew Yulong Yuan. After hearing what Zai said, Xiao Yang, like Du, held his head with a headache and did not answer. Therefore, it was Yulongai Yuan who answered Zai's question. The other party just put his arm around Xiaoyang's neck, made a yeah gesture to them, and said in a very complacent tone, "Of course, Xiao Yang and I have known each other for 2 years. After hearing what Yu Longyuan said, Xiao Yang also covered his face, and then said helplessly, Xiaoji, do you remember the person I told you about, the one who brought me to Lanling Island? Oh, come to think of it, you did mention such a person, but I seem to have never seen him. Could this person be it? Then, he suddenly seemed to have figured something out and looked at Yu Longyuan, who was hugging Xiao Yang affectionately. Seeing that Zai seemed to understand, Xiao Yang nodded helplessly and said, yes, it's this guy. As he said this, he glared at the other person. Chapter 90. Sunday and Fossilized Pterosaur. Looking at the car going away, Daigo said to Wataru and Aju beside him, I'm really looking forward to their performance at the Quartz Conference. Aju, who had fought with all three of them, nodded and said, I don't know much about the new boy, but since he was specially recommended by you, I think he won't be bad. As for Zai and the others, they all have great potential, especially Zai. I see endless possibilities in him. Although Xiao Yang is older than the other two, it is not too late, and his potential is being stimulated little by little. Relying on his experience in recent years, he will definitely have a period of explosive growth in the future. It is not impossible that he can become one of the official 4 Heavenly Kings, or even the champion in one fell swoop. As for Sunday's potential, it is also very great. Her biggest problem now is that she lacks experience and is not flexible enough in combat, but she still has plenty of time in the future. Once she makes up for this shortcoming, her achievements will not be too low. Du nodded to Aju's evaluation of Zai and the others and said, Xiao Yuan has great potential and is still in the period of explosive growth. Although this year's Quartz Conference can be described as a fierce battle between dragons and tigers, with Xiaowen's current strength, it will not be a big problem for him to enter the top 8. But then, he touched his chin again, turned to the two and asked, speaking of Zai, what do you think of his awakened wave power and his identity as the wave hero? Hearing Jinto's question, Daigo and Aju couldn't help but look at each other, and then Daigo spoke first, I have also learned something about the heroes of wave. At present, besides Satoshi, there are only 2 known heroes of wave. One is Agen, who is still traveling in the Sinnoh region. As for the other one, you all know him. Aju also continued, the heroes of Bodeo only appear when major historical events or disasters are about to happen. As far as I know, the only recorded hero of Bodeo seems to be Yelan, who defended the city of Orodran thousands of years ago. Daigo stroked his chin and said, now, 3 wave heroes appear at the same time in an era. Does this indicate something? Du shook his cloak and said, no matter what happens, as the top combat force of the alliance, we must be fully prepared. That's very well said. Zaidu has become a very responsible person. Suddenly, a soft voice sounded behind the 3 of them. The 3 of them were stunned at first, then they immediately turned around and saw the slender and graceful figure. Seeing the other person's appearance, Du couldn't help but said in surprise, You are. The 4 of them got in the car and set out on their journey again. After driving for 3 days, they arrived at a vast grassland. Boom! Hi! It's finally solved, said Yu Longyuan, wiping the sweat from his forehead and looking at the ruined grass in front of him. The Tyrannosaurus standing next to Yulongyuan also had some scars on his body, and a Kabutosaurus and a Hackosaurus were lying beside him. Zai and Xiao Yang also supported their knees with their hands, breathing heavily, and Venusaur, Sauropodomorph, Magic and Infernape were also lying beside them. The 2 turned their eyes to Sunday in front of them, who was currently treating the wounds on the fossil pterosaur. Xiao Yang wiped the sweat off his face, looked at Xiao Ji beside him, and said helplessly, this seems to be the 3rd time, right? Zai nodded silently and began to treat the injuries of Infernape and the others. In fact, their injuries were not that serious, they were just too tired. Sunday just looked at the pterosaur fossil whose eyes had turned into whirlpools, sighed silently, and said, is it still not working? At night, everyone sat around the campfire, eating dinner and discussing what happened today. My trainer level is still too low. Pteranodon doesn't listen to my commands at all. Maybe I'm not suitable to be his trainer, Sunday said somewhat discouraged. Seeing this, Zai immediately said, that's not the case. We have all seen how hard Sunday has worked. At the beginning, the pterosaur would attack everyone as soon as it came out, but now it can sit down and eat well. As for what Zai said, Sunday shook his head and said, I just used rich food to temporarily stabilize it. I'm afraid the reason he stayed was not because of me as a trainer. Xiao Yang also sighed silently. To be honest, when Xiao Yang and Xiao Zhi learned that Sunday had accidentally caught the fossil pterosaur in Dasha Valley, they were surprised for a while. But then, a troublesome matter had to be put in front of everyone. Pterosaur is already a mid-level elite Pokémon, while Sunday's trainer level has only reached the peak of the quasi-elite level. In other words, she can only command Pokémon at the peak of the quasi-elite level at best, not to mention that the one she has to control is Pterosaur, the overlord of the ancient sky. However, Sunday currently urgently needs such a powerful combat force. She really hopes that she can fight alongside Xiaozai and the others, hoping to achieve good results in the Quartz Conference. So Xiaozai and the other two joined forces to help her. Then they suppressed the runaway fossil pterosaur with a small one every day and a big one every 2 days. 7 days have passed now, but they can no longer control it. It's good enough that it doesn't run away from time to time. Thinking of this, he couldn't help but glance at Yulongai Yuan who was standing beside him. To be honest, if he wasn't there, it would be quite difficult to suppress the fossil pterosaur with just the combat power of himself, Xiaozai and Sunday. Recalling the opponent's luxurious lineup, the intermediate-level king of land sharks, the junior-level king of staff-tailed scaled ankylosaur, the junior-level king of double-axe war dragon, the peak-level quasi-king Hakron, the advanced-level quasi-king thorn dragon and Kabutops, Xiao Yang admitted that he was indeed jealous. At this time, Yulongai Yuan also said, I think, although the level of the trainer is also important, the most important thing is the violent temper of Pteranodon. For a sky overlord like Pteranodon, you must use tougher means to tame him, Sunday. Hearing the other party's words, Sunday couldn't help but smile bitterly and said, I want to do that too, but when I want to show my majesty, the other party will immediately attack me. Xiaozai proposed another method, I don't think you necessarily need to use strong means to tame it. You can try to communicate with it. Doesn't it let you get close to it now? As long as you deepen the bond between you and make the other person recognize you in his heart, you will be able to fight together one day. Sunday thought about it for a moment, then nodded and said, I'll try my best. Xiao Yang picked up the wooden bowl, drank a mouthful of soup silently, and thought secretly in his heart, I think what we need to do most is not these, but to find a qualified rocket team trio. Chapter 91. Daily Training. Desert Dragonfly uses Earthquake. Abandoned Monkey uses Bounce, then Shadow Fist. At this time, Xiaozai and others were carrying out their daily training. The abandoned monkey jumped high, avoiding the earthquake caused by the desert dragonfly, and then launched 2 shadow punches towards the opponent, throwing fists like black shadows. Desert dragonfly uses jet fire. The desert dragonfly immediately opened its mouth and spit out a jet of flame, and it was in a stalemate with the shadow fist in mid-air. At this moment, the abandoned monkey, who was still in the air, hugged his body and rolled over quickly. He simply ignored Newton's laws and approached the opponent by following the jet of flames from the desert dragonfly. Go ahead. Abandoned monkey uses the fist of fury. Oh no, desert dragonfly, get out of the way. At this time, the desert dragonfly, which was still spewing flames, had no time to dodge and was hit head-on by the abandoned monkey's angry fist. The powerful force acted on its abdomen, causing the desert dragonfly to scream and was directly knocked away by the force. Desert Dragonfly. Sunday couldn't help but exclaimed when he saw this, and then immediately ran towards the desert dragonfly lying on the ground. Xiaozai and Monkey King also hurriedly stopped what they were doing and went over to check on the desert dragonfly. However, the desert dragonfly was not actually seriously injured. After a little recovery, it was able to stand up again. The remaining fire monkeys put on various weights and practiced against each other. On the other side, Xiao Yang and Yulongai Yuan were chatting idly while observing the training of other Pokémon. At this time, Venusaur was constantly releasing leaf skills to Scyther, while Scyther was waving his sickle to cut down the flying leaves one by one. He was practicing his skills, attack speed, and concentration. On the other side, the Flame Horse and Megalodon used charged flame attacks and water jets respectively to move quickly, while the Cat Boss used his physical advantage to dodge their attacks. This was the inspiration that Aju gave to Xiao Yang. Since Mud could fully utilize his physical characteristics to achieve that level, his own Pokémon might be able to do the same. Therefore, he is now focusing on cultivating Catman and Scyther. They are the 2 Pokémon with the most special body structures in Xiao Yang's hands. Whether it's the sickle-shaped arms and light body of Scyther, or the soft body of Cat Boss that has strong toughness and flexibility, there is a lot of room for training, and it can also effectively train the speed of Flame Horse and Megalodon. As for Venusaur, his fighting method is mainly meat shield and blood-reducing tactics. As the name suggests, it is to make use of Venusaur's own strong defense and recovery moves such as photosynthesis, supplemented by blood-reducing and transformation moves such as poison, hypnotic powder, and parasitic seeds to wear down the opponent. Therefore, Xiao Yang will specifically practice the use of his moves later. Looking at Bulbasaur that was waving leaves, Xiao Yang couldn't help but frowned. He stretched out his hand to touch his chin, thinking secretly, if it's just like this, I'm afraid it's still not enough. Speaking of which, in the original work, when Xiaozai was traveling in the Kalos region, he seemed to have met a person who was very good at using Bulbasaur in that ninja village. Maybe I can try my luck there. Thinking of this, Xiao Yang nodded and decided that after challenging the gym, if there was still time, he would go to the Kalos area to see if he could gain anything. As for the Pokémon of Yulongai Yuan on the other side, the training is a bit intense. The double-axe war dragon and the staff-tailed scaled dragon are wrestling with each other. The visual feast of fist-to-flesh combat is very shocking. The biting Tyrannosaurus is sparring with the Thorn Dragon, the Kabutops, and the Haxorus, with all kinds of colorful skills blasting everywhere. Of course, Garchomp had brought all kinds of weights at Yulongai Yuan's request, otherwise, with his strength, he would have defeated the other three Pokémon long ago. After just finishing their training, the four of them were gathered together, discussing their experiences and helping Sunday who had the most questions. Sunday, I actually think you shouldn't rely too much on the sandstorm tactics, Xiao Yang said to Sunday who was sitting opposite him. This was a problem that Xiao Yang had discovered a long time ago. In addition to being good at using intelligence to formulate tactics, Sunday also relied too much on the traditional sandstorm tactics in the game when fighting. If it was Xiao Yang before he traveled through time, he would definitely have highly praised this weather tactic. But since he traveled through time and gained a deep understanding of the role that weather tactics can play in real Pokémon battles, Xiao Yang knew very well that this method could only be mastered by a master. Why is that? Sunday asked Xiao Yang in confusion, because in her opinion, the gains that weather tactics can bring are definitely very considerable, which is the case in the simulated battle. In addition, Xiaozai's clever use of weather and venue made her more determined in this idea, but now Xiao Yang said that this method would not work. However, not only Yulongai Yuan, but even Xiaozai nodded in agreement with Xiao Yang's statement. Yulong Yuan was the first to speak. Sendai, in fact, the weather tactics are very easy to be targeted, and the effect is not as significant as you think. It is more suitable for use in a favorable situation, but if it is unfavorable, it will be very difficult. If you face those more experienced trainers, then this tactic will be easily cracked by the opponent. Xiao Yang nodded in agreement and said, let me give you an example. For example, if you use the sandstorm tactic to fight against Xiaozai, then there are three problems in front of you. First of all, Xiaozai's Pokémon is stronger than yours, and they are very bulletin. Have perseverance. Maybe you opened the weather 2 or 3 times in a row and still failed to defeat any of the opponent's Pokémon. If that happens, the problem will be very serious. First of all, weather moves actually consume a lot of energy, and at the moment when the favorable weather ends, your Pokémon will most likely be unable to adapt for a certain period of time. This period may be very short, but if you face a fast attack player like Satoshi, your Pokémon will most likely be defeated directly. After hearing their words, Sunday couldn't help but fall into deep thought. Based on his understanding of Xiaozai, this possibility was very high. On the other side, Xiaozai, who was used as an example, scratched his head and said to Sunday, actually, I don't think we need to completely abandon the sandstorm tactics. The main thing is not to make it the focus of the battle. Sunday, you can focus on the Pokémon itself to improve your tactics. After hearing what Xiaozai said, Sunday thought for a moment, then nodded slightly and said, then I'll trouble you for my help next. Chapter 92, Naughty Yulong Yuan? Xiaozai, who was helping Sunday wash the dishes after dinner, couldn't help but look at Xiao Yang and Yulongai Yuan who were discussing something intensely on the other side. He couldn't help but turn his head and say to Sunday, the relationship between the two of them is really good. Sunday, who was wiping the plates, couldn't help but pause for a moment, then recalled the scene of the meal just now. Originally, everyone was about to enjoy lunch. Among the 4 people present, except Zai who was eating very quickly, the other 3 ate relatively slowly. Sunday's upbringing did not allow her to eat big mouthfuls of food, while Xiao Yang and Yulong Yuan frowned as they looked at the 2 dishes in front of them. In front of Xiao Yang was a plate of shredded pork with green peppers, and in front of Yulong Yuan was a plate of minced meat and eggplant. Since the 4 of them knew some cooking skills, they decided that each of them would make 2 dishes. The minced meat and eggplant in front of Yulong Yuan was made by Xiao Yang, and needless to say, the shredded pork with green pepper in front of Xiao Yang was naturally made by Yulong Yuan. The 2 looked at each other, then buried their heads in eating the rice in their bowls, without touching the dishes in front of them. At this moment, Yulong Yuan's eyes suddenly turned, and then he showed a sly smile. He then stretched out his chopsticks to pick up some shredded pork with green peppers in front of Xiao Yang, and then put it in the other's bowl while Xiao Yang hadn't reacted yet. When Xiao Yang saw the extra shredded pork and green pepper in his bowl, he was furious and stared at Yulong Yuan with wide eyes. The other party smiled at Xiao Yang and said, "Xiao Yang, this is the shredded pork with green pepper that I made especially for you. I know that this is your favorite dish. Are you embarrassed to wolf it down because there are so many people here? It doesn't matter. You don't have to care so much. Look, Xiao Ji is quite generous." Hearing Yulong Yuan's words, Xiao Ji couldn't help but look up at Xiao Yang and said, "So, Xiao Yang, you like to eat shredded pork with green peppers? I don't think we ever saw you cook it when we were on Lanling Island." Before Xiao Yang could speak, Yulong Yuan said, "Hey, Zai, you don't understand. Xiao Yang is not good at cooking this dish. When I was with him before, he could eat 3 big bowls of this dish." "Hey! Is that so?" Zai looked at Xiao Yang with some curiosity. Xiao Yang looked at the shredded pork with green pepper in his bowl, then glanced at the minced meat and eggplant in front of Yulong Yuan with the same sly smile, and then said to Zai, "Yes, that's right." When he heard Xiao Yang's answer, Yulong Yuan was stunned and immediately had a bad feeling in his heart. Sure enough, Xiao Yang took advantage of the other party's daze and quickly stretched out his chopsticks, added some minced meat and eggplant, and then put it in Yulong Yuan's bowl at lightning speed, and then said to him with a smile, "How dare you talk about me, Xiao Yuan, you obviously like minced meat and eggplant very much, but I haven't seen you take any since we started eating." Ha ha ha, really? Ha ha ha, that's only natural." The 2 of them stared at each other with a fake smile, and then swoosh! Zai looked at the 2 dishes that suddenly disappeared in front of him in surprise, then looked up at Xiao Yang and Yulong Yuan's bowls and found that the 2 dishes were directly covering each other's bowls. And the 2 of them looked at each other in a friendly manner. The memory ends. Because Sunday simply didn't want to recall the scene that followed. She really didn't expect that 2 grown men would actually fight with each other because of being picky about food. Thinking of this, she couldn't help but sigh and murmured softly, "To be honest, I really don't understand Yulong Yuan now." Yes, that's right, it was Yulong Yuan, because a similar thing happened a few days ago. I remember that the 4 of them were sitting in the car looking at the scenery outside the window. Just when Xiao Yang was distracted, Yulong Yuan quietly handed him a bottle of water, and then said slowly, "Drink some water." Since Xiao Yang didn't know what he was thinking at the time, he didn't pay attention and just picked up the water and took a sip. But then Sunday noticed that the other person had a frown on his face and looked bitter. After Xiao Yang recovered, he glared at the other person, and then the 2 of them started kicking and pinching each other secretly. Of course, these little actions could not be hidden from Sunday, and Zai's reaction was relatively simple, thinking that the 2 of them were just in a good relationship. I seem to understand a little bit why Xiao Yang had that expression after seeing Yulong Yuan. Shende silently looked at Xiao Yang and Yulong Yuan who were huddled together doing something unknown. I never thought that the usually steady Xiao Yang would have such a side. The same goes for Xiao Yuan. He usually looks quite reliable, but I never expected that he is actually so naughty. At this time, Xiao Yang was looking at Yulong Yuan in front of him with a speechless face. "I say, can't you change your mischievous nature?" In response to Xiao Yang's words, Yulong Yuan waved his hands helplessly and said, "There's nothing I can do about it. This has been a habit I have developed since I was a child." Then, the other party pretended to be distressed and said to Xiao Yang, "To be honest, I'm almost sick because I've been controlled by my cousin for some time." Then he immediately turned from sadness to joy, patted Xiao Yang on the shoulder, and said with a happy face, "Now I finally meet a close friend, how can I not tease him?" Xiao Yang felt somewhat helpless about the other party's temper, but no matter what, he had helped him a lot, and he couldn't just push him away like that. Not wanting to dwell on this issue any longer, Xiao Yang immediately changed the subject and asked, "How many badges have you gotten now?" Hearing Xiaoyang's words again, Yu Longyuan immediately took out the badge box from his backpack, opened it, and showed it in front of Xiao Yang. Seeing the 8 neatly arranged badges in the other party's badge box, Xiao Yang was a little shocked at first, and then asked in confusion, "Zai and I only got 2 badges, but there are still 6 gyms that we haven't challenged. Since you have already challenged all the gyms, why don't you find a place to practice properly?" In response to Xiao Yang's question, the other party showed an expression of shock and confusion, and then said excitedly, "Come on, my big brother, why do you think I came out to travel? Of course, it is to enjoy various emergencies and exciting adventures during the trip. Just based on my family background, do I need to challenge that alliance? Honestly, if my family hadn't asked me to do that, I would have just laid down and become a homebody, okay? Although I also like Pokémon battles, I yearn for freedom and a life of playing badly more." Hearing what the other party said, Xiao Yang felt that it made sense. To be honest, if the conditions were not so, he might have laid down long ago. After all, it had been 5 years since he had finished his career. He hadn't even made it into the league in 5 years. But in the end he still reminded Yu Longyuan, "Although our upcoming journey may indeed be very exciting, you have to stay calm. I have a feeling that this next adventure may be a bit too exciting." Chapter 93, Citywide Internet Outage. Aiming at the Quartz Conference, Zai and his friends, who are challenging the 8 major gyms, come to a town called Matcha City. Actually, I've wanted to complain about this for a long time. Are the naming methods in this world so casual? Matcha City? Does this city produce a lot of matcha? At this time, Yu, who was walking on the street with Xiao Yang, couldn't help but pull Xiao Yang's clothes, leaned close to his ear, and asked him quietly. In response to this, Xiao Yang spread his hands helplessly and said, "Don't ask me this, you should ask the producers or the people in this world what they think." Yu Longyuan asked quietly again, "Do you have any impression of this city?" Hearing the other party's question, Xiao Yang couldn't help but roll his eyes at him and said, "How is that possible? Let's not talk about anything else. The original series has more than 200 episodes. The original protagonists have visited at least 80 towns, if not 100. Plus, it was quite a long time ago. How can I remember them all?" Then, Xiao Yang couldn't help but sigh, looked at Yu Longyuan, and whispered, "To be honest, I'm really surprised that you don't know about the huge IP of Pokémon. It's a good thing that you were reborn into the Yu Long family, otherwise, would you have just become an idle otaku?" Hearing Xiao Yang say this, Yu Longyuan put his hands behind his back and hugged the back of his head. "Maybe, after all, you know my temper. If I hadn't experienced the fun of Pokémon battles, I might not have become a trainer. What are you two talking about in the back? Hurry up, we're almost at the Pokémon Center." Sunday couldn't help but remind Xiao Yang and Yulongyuan when he noticed that they had fallen behind. He exchanged glances with the other person and immediately followed. "By the way, do you feel that there is something wrong with this city?" At this moment, Zai, who was walking in front, suddenly asked everyone. "Something's wrong?" Hearing Zai's question, everyone couldn't help but look around. Looking at the crowded streets, Yu Longyuan said in surprise, "Apart from the fact that there are more people and it's crowded, there doesn't seem to be anything wrong. Did you notice anything?" Ever since he learned from Xiao Yang that Zai was the protagonist of the original work he mentioned, Yu Longyuan has been paying silent attention to him, wanting to see for himself whether Zai's disaster-prone physique, as Xiao Yang described it, was as miraculous as he said. However, at least during this period of time, no special events occurred, which made Yu Longyuan feel a little bored. "No, something is wrong," Sunday suddenly said at this moment. Then, she stretched out her beautiful finger and pointed forward, "Look, aren't there too many people in uniform on the street? If I'm not mistaken, they should be employees of a certain company, and it's not even time to get off work yet." After hearing Sunday's reminder, Xiao Yang immediately reacted. It was true. Judging from the current time, there shouldn't be so many people on the street, and Xiao Yang carefully checked the complexions of the people around him and found that they all looked bad. It wasn't that they looked troubled or angry, but it was mainly because they all seemed to be bored. As a man of action, Zai immediately stepped forward and grabbed someone, asking, "Excuse me, uncle, what happened here? I see that you all don't look well." The man who was held by Zai sighed and said, "Actually, the internet in this city was cut off for some unknown reason 7 days ago, and it was a large-scale outage. All electronic devices that rely on the internet are unusable." Everyone was quite happy at the beginning. After all, the company was on holiday because of this, but now it feels like we have been too idle. Disconnected. Everyone couldn't help but look at each other. After all, such a large-scale internet outage in an entire city was rare, let alone one that lasted for 7 days. Yu Longyuan couldn't help but ask, didn't anyone come to deal with it? It's more than just having someone come to handle it. The man said in an excited tone, even the Alliance sent special personnel to deal with this matter, but no matter what they did, they couldn't find the reason for the internet outage. Even the Alliance has sent people? Sunday asked in surprise. The other party nodded helplessly and said, yes, because of the internet outage, the Pokémon Center should be the one that is most affected. The machines we are using now to exchange Pokémon actually need to rely on the internet. Now that the network is affected, the machines cannot be used. How is this possible? Sunday said in disbelief. What's wrong, Sunday? Zai asked curiously. Even if the exchange device could not be used, the other party would not make such a big noise. And Sunday said solemnly, you may not know that the network that the switching device we are using now relies on is not an ordinary line, but a network line specially constructed by the Alliance that has gathered a large number of professionals. Even if an area is completely cut off from the internet, there should be no problem with the switching device's line. Hearing Shendai's words, Xiao Yang couldn't help but look at Yulongyuan, and the other party nodded slightly with the same solemn expression. As a member of the Yulong family, he was naturally very clear about this matter. Then Yulongyuan reached out and touched his chin, muttering, this is really a disaster-prone physique. And it's a big disaster when it comes. Xiao Yang also nodded and said, even the Alliance's network can be cut off. It seems that the other party is quite powerful. It might be a large criminal gang. But at present, it seems that only Matcha City has been affected. What do you think? Could it be that Team Rocket is behind this again? Sunday asked the three of them. Due to the two incidents with the Saint Anno and Dasha Valley, Sunday was highly alert to Team Rocket. It's hard to say, anyway, let's go to the Pokémon Center and take a look. After saying that, everyone immediately ran towards the Pokémon Center. Once they entered the Pokémon Center, they immediately saw Miss Joy constantly answering and making phone calls and many staff members in uniforms debugging various electronic equipment. Upon seeing this, everyone handed their Pokémon to Miss Joy for treatment. Although the network was affected, the various sophisticated instruments in the Pokémon Center were fine. Then I asked Miss Joy about the situation. Chapter 94. Online World. Is this here? Zai looked at the business card in his hand and the house in front of him. By the way, is it useful for us to look for Dr. Akihabara now? Didn't he disappear 5 days ago? Even the police couldn't find any clues, Yu Longyuan asked everyone. Xiao Yang waved his hands helplessly and said, there's nothing we can do. We don't have anything else to do right now. We can only try our luck here. Besides, do you think we can pull him? As he spoke, Xiao Yang looked towards Zai in front of him who was very excited and had a determined look on his face. Okay, there's no point talking about this now, let's go in and try our luck first. Sunday stepped forward to smooth things over. Zai pulled his hat, then walked towards the gate first, stretched out his hand and knocked on the door, shouting inside, sorry to bother you. Then he opened the door which was not locked at all and walked straight in. Seeing this, the other three immediately followed him. After a brief tour in the hall, everyone walked towards the interior of the house. Looking at the deep road in front of them, Xiao Yang couldn't help but say, I have to say, this place is quite big. He really deserves to be a doctor, right? He must be an unknown person, but he is also very rich. Yu Longyuan waved his hand and said, it's not a big deal. It's not even half of my pond. I'm more concerned about why there is no police officer or even a cordon set up in a place that can be considered a crime scene. I heard that because of the internet outage, many police officers were sent out to investigate. Although there are people handling this matter, the execution is not that strong, Sunday replied. Hey! We've reached the end. What is that? At this moment, Zai's pace suddenly slowed down, and then he spoke. When the three heard it, they immediately looked forward and found a very strange round platform in front of them. When he saw the round table, Xiao Yang couldn't help but stop, then he put his hand on his chin and began to think about something. Yu Longyuan also stopped when he saw this, and turned to Xiao Yang and asked, "What's wrong? Is there any problem? I always feel like I have seen this scene somewhere, but I just can't remember where. But what I can be sure of is that this should be a plot in the original book. Hey! What is this?" Just when Xiao Yang stopped to think, Zai and Sunday suddenly screamed in the front. The two immediately looked in the direction of the sound and found that a glass wall had risen at the original platform at some point, and Zai and Sunday were trapped inside. Seeing this, the two of them immediately ran over. Then, a flash of white light flashed in Xiao Yang's mind, and he immediately understood which episode this was from. He immediately released his scyther. "Spy Mantis, use the combo to break the glass cover for me." Crack! The moment scyther was released, it immediately rushed towards the glass cover that trapped Satoshi and Sunday, then condensed insect energy on its sickle and swung it wildly, trying to break the glass cover. Seeing this, Yu Longyuan on the side immediately threw out his poke ball. After a flash of white light, a staff-tailed scaled dragon with golden and red scales appeared in front of everyone. Yu Longyuan pointed forward and said, "Go ahead, staff-tailed scaled dragon, use dragon claw." The staff-tailed scaled dragon immediately stretched out its hands and condensed tremendous dragon energy in its claws. Then a blue-purple claw-shaped energy covered its palms. It then swung its claws quickly, frantically attacking the glass barrier. But even so, there was not even a scratch left on the glass barrier. "If that's the case, I'll come too." Seeing this, Zai inside the glass barrier also wanted to release his own Pokémon to attack, but then... What is this? The circular device above suddenly released a blue light like lightning, and then Zai and Sunday found that their bodies suddenly began to slowly dissipate from the bottom to the top. "What's going on? My body?" Faced with this unprecedented emergency, the holy representative was a little panicked. The body began to disappear. Faced with this scene, Zai felt helpless, but then he immediately reached out and grabbed Sunday's hand. Since he didn't know what was going on, Zai could only do what he could for the time being. Sunday, who was originally very panicked, calmed down a little. Although she was still very scared, she knew that the boy who grabbed her arm would definitely protect her. Immediately afterwards, the two figures disappeared from the spot. Xiao Yang ran outside the glass cover and punched the barrier angrily, gritting his teeth and saying, "Damn it, I'm still too late." Yu Longyuan on the side was stunned. Faced with such a sci-fi scene, he had no idea what to do. He could only turn his head stiffly to look at Xiao Yang and asked him, "Xiao Yang, Xiao Ji and Sheng Dai, they should not have already." Xiao Yang, who knew what he was thinking, rolled his eyes at him and said, "Don't worry, Xiao Ji is the protagonist of this world after all. He won't die so easily. They have just entered the online world now." When Zai opened his eyes again, he found himself in a very strange place. As for how strange it was, the place where I was standing was dark, and it felt like there was no real ground at all. There were a lot of blue and purple, cold-toned lights constantly passing through, and there was endless darkness all around. However, what really surprised Zai was the towering building in front of him. Made up of countless pieces of mirrored glass and metal plates, it reflects the surrounding light, with various colors constantly changing on it. The top of the building is extremely futuristic, with huge antennas and signal receivers extending into the sky like treetops, capturing signals from all directions, with light constantly flowing into it. This is a special building full of cyberpunk style. Zai quickly came back to his senses and found that Sunday was not with him. He opened his mouth and shouted to the surroundings, "Hey! Sunday, where are you? If you hear me, please respond. Xiao Yang! Xiao Yuan! Are you there? Can you hear me?" After shouting for a while, he found that the people around him were quiet. Then Zai turned his gaze to the building in front of him, took a step without hesitation, and walked inside. Chapter 95, the future seed. You mean, Zai and Sunday have entered the online world? In Dr. Akihabara's house, Yu Longyuan asked Xiao Yang with some surprise. At this time, Xiao Yang, who was constantly checking the surrounding situation, nodded and said, "Yes, that's right." Then he paused slightly, and then continued, "According to my impression, it is indeed true." Hearing the other party's words, Yu Longyuan couldn't help but raise his eyebrows and said with a little doubt, "In your impression?" Xiao Yang turned around and explained to Yu Longyuan, "Actually, I am not particularly clear about the content of this episode. Due to special reasons, this episode was not broadcast in China. When I was a kid, I watched the original Pokémon on DVD, and this episode was not included in it. I learned about this episode while watching videos. The general content is that the three members of Team Rocket took advantage of Professor Akihabara, the owner of the house we are in now, and used the 3D dragon he invented to affect the teleportation device to capture Pokémon on a large scale." Then, Xiao Yang pointed at the round table device and said, "Then Dr. Akihabara used this device and the second 3D dragon he invented to teleport Zai and his friends to the cyber world and defeated Team Rocket. But the problem now is that it is impossible for the three members of Team Rocket in the original work to do bad things again, and Dr. Akihabara you mentioned has never appeared from beginning to end," Yu Longyuan said, taking over Xiao Yang's words. Xiao Yang nodded, and then said solemnly, "It's not just that. If we follow the original method, we only need to create a special antivirus software to solve the problem. But now the incident has not been solved until now, which means that the method is ineffective, and the scope of impact is also relatively large." Yu Longyuan nodded after understanding the situation and said, "Anyway, the most urgent thing now is to find Dr. Akihabara, right?" Xiao Yang sighed and said, "This is the only way. I have no other choice. After all, we don't know who is behind this. The only thing that is certain is that it is definitely not a small force this time. Maybe it is really the rocket's headquarters that has been dispatched. After all, if it can directly affect the online world, it is indeed worth their effort." After saying that, the two began to search around, trying to find some clues. But what they didn't notice was that there was a pair of eyes in the dark, staring at them. At this moment, in a mysterious room somewhere, a man was watching the scene in the video with great interest. "This is such a pleasant surprise. I just wanted to use the internet to search for some clues, but I didn't expect to catch a big fish." Nanning raised a strange smile, turned his head to look at the man who was tied up behind him, wearing a white coat and glasses, and said, "Thank you so much this time, Dr. Akihabara." At this time, Dr. Akihabara, who was tied up, was struggling constantly. Afterwards, the man looked at the scene on the screen again. This time the screen was divided into two, one side was monitoring Xiao Yang and the others, while the other side was showing Zai who had entered the online world. "Perhaps I can prepare a suitable stage for this child of destiny," he said, and then he stood up and walked towards a machine that was similar to the round table in Dr. Akihabara's house. He took out a switch and pressed a button gently. Then, he disappeared on the spot just like Zai and Sunday before. At this time, Zai, who successfully entered the tower, was once again shocked by the scene before him. Because it was actually a battlefield, nothing else. "I thought I would enter an environment full of technology or fantasy, but I didn't expect it to be like this," and Zai looked around and muttered, "Such a tall tower, and there is a battle arena inside, and it seems there is no way to go up." Just when Zai didn't know what to do next, a huge screen suddenly appeared above him, and then an indistinct black shadow appeared on the screen. A hoarse voice came from the screen, "Welcome to the online world. This is a special place I created for you. How is it? Do you like it?" Zai looked at it carefully and shouted to the person on the screen, "You are the one who did all this. Why did you destroy the network? And where did you take the Sunday?" The other party spread out his hands and said leisurely, "Don't be so anxious, I will answer your questions one by one, but before that, let's play a game first. At the same time, I will directly tell you the whereabouts of your companions." After saying this, without waiting for Zai's response, he raised his hand and snapped his fingers lightly. Then suddenly many strange numbers appeared around. These numbers continued to integrate into the surrounding environment and transform the surrounding geography. Soon, Zai found himself in a special room. Although there was nothing inside, the surrounding walls were full of technological style. In addition, there were 4 iron pillars around with 4 black crystals suspended on them. The crystals exuded an aura that made Zai feel disgusted, but his attention was soon attracted by another place. The floor in front of him suddenly opened slowly, and an iron cage slowly rose from it. When he saw the person in the iron cage, Zai couldn't help but shrink his pupils and shouted, "Sunday!" At this time, Sunday was locked in an iron cage, unconscious. Zai stared at the person on the screen angrily and shouted, "What did you do to the Sunday?" The other party just waved his hand and said, "Don't worry, he is just unconscious. I am not interested in doing anything to a little girl." Then, the other party interlocked his fingers, put his chin on them, and said to Zai, "The rules of the game are very simple. You just need to rescue the little girl in the cage, but..." Then, 4 more floors in front were slowly opened, and the figures of 4 Pokémon appeared one by one on the field. Seeing these Pokémon, Zai couldn't help shrinking his pupils, and secretly said, "Are these Alito, Iron Palm, Messenger Bird, and Dungairy? But what do they look like?" After hearing what Zai said, the person on the screen shook his head and said, "No, although they do look a bit similar, they are not the Pokémon you are talking about." Then he stretched out his hand and said, "Let me introduce them to you. Iron Warrior, Iron Arm, Iron Bag, and Iron Track. They are also Pokémon, but they have bad personalities. You better be careful and don't let them tear you to pieces." Then, red light flashed in the eyes of the 4 Pokémon at the same time. Chapter 96, Fierce Battle with Future Seeds. Infernape uses flame jets, Lizard uses seed machine guns, Forsaken uses shadow fists, and Dragonite uses water cannons. In the online world, Zai was commanding his 4 Pokémon to attack the technologically advanced Pokémon on the opposite side, but unfortunately the effect was minimal. Zai gritted his teeth and thought to himself, "What a strong strength! They are obviously only at the peak of Quasi King, but this power..." The Iron Warrior swung the double-edged sword in his hand and easily cut through the flames of the Fire Monkey. Then, he used his backhand to use a spiritual blade. Iron Arms stretched out his huge hands to block the Forest Lizard's seed machine gun and the Thorn Dragon King's water cannon. Behind him, Iron Bag took out his thing that looked like an iron can and sprayed a large amount of freeze-dried water from it. The cold wind blew straight at the Forest Lizard and the Thorn Dragon King. On the other side, Tigerji used the rolling skill and continuously attacked the abandoned monkey. No matter how the abandoned monkey attacked the opponent did not stop. Looking at his suppressed Pokémon, Zai couldn't help but sweat on his forehead. The gap between himself and his opponent was obviously not that big, and the opponent didn't have a trainer to command him, but he was still suppressed. Infernape, use the largest range of sparks to stop other Pokémon, and Lizard, you concentrate your strength on attacking the iron tracks. Zai knew very well that if the iron tracks continued to roll like this, the opponent's ability would definitely increase to a terrifying level. Hearing what Zai said, Infernape suddenly accumulated fire energy, its belly swelled up, and then it spit out a large amount of fire rain. Although the skill of sparks has small power, it consumes less energy and can be used for a long time and over a large area. Countless tiny sparks flew towards the Iron Warriors, but they easily blocked them through their own methods. However, Zai achieved his goal of restraining his opponent. Afterwards, the Forest Lizard took the lead, using blades from both hands at the same time and quickly rushed towards the iron track. The 2 leaf blades slashed at the rapidly rotating iron track at the same time. The collision between the two produced a lot of sparks. The 2 sides were deadlocked for a moment, but then the Forest Lizard was knocked away by the opponent's powerful force, but the opponent's rolling speed also dropped significantly. Immediately afterwards, the Thorn Dragon King's water cannon attacked head-on, hitting him directly on the left side and pushing him away for a long distance. Immediately afterwards, he was greeted by the angry fist of the abandoned monkey. The dark purple fist shadow rushed towards the opponent as fast as a black meteor. Boom! This attack directly knocked Tizuji away, and he fell heavily to the ground. Just when Zai thought he had successfully knocked the opponent down, the opponent slowly stood up, shook his head, and then launched a rolling attack on them again. This scene directly shocked Zai. How can this be? Ha ha ha, the brutality of these Pokémon is far beyond your imagination. Although there is not much difference in level, in terms of destructive power and aggressiveness, your Pokémon is far inferior to them. Woogie! Fire Monkey! At this moment, Infernape, who was trying his best to restrain the other 3 Pokémon, also got into trouble. The Iron Warrior quickly flashed behind the Fire Monkey, then launched a sneak attack on its vital points, knocking it flying. The Iron Armsman jumped up directly, clenched his fists, and terrifying lightning gathered in his fists. He launched 2 lightning punches directly at the Fire Monkey in the air. The Fire Monkey couldn't help but scream, and was knocked heavily to the ground. Just when he was about to struggle, water cannon skills were directly spit out from the iron bag in the distance. Seeing this, Zai immediately shouted to the other 3 Pokémon, "Hurry up and support Infernape." Forest Lizard took the lead, using Lightning Flash and quickly rushed towards Infernape, while Thor used Water Cannon to counter Ironbag's Water Cannon to block the opponent's attack. Monkey King kept using his skills to interfere with the other 3 Pokémon. Through their efforts, Infernape was successfully rescued by the Forest Lizard. While Zai breathed a sigh of relief, his face was still extremely solemn. It is necessary to possess stronger power, whether it is the raging fire of Infernape, the lushness of the Forest Lizard, or the anger points of the Forsaken. As long as one of them can be used, it is possible to change the current situation. Then, an idea suddenly popped up in his mind: why not just let one of them get seriously injured? The moment this thought came to his mind, Zai quickly shook his head. At the same time, he felt very confused in his heart, wondering why he had such an idea. At this time, the man who had been observing the opponent on the screen couldn't help but curl his lips slightly. His eyes did not stay on the battlefield, but were observing Zai and the 4 crystals around him. He murmured, "It looks like it's almost done, but it seems like it needs another dose of strong stuff." Then, the other party suddenly said, "It seems that little brother needs a little pressure. Besides, a game like this with only rewards but no punishment is really too boring, isn't it?" Hearing the other party's malicious words, Zai couldn't help but look up and asked with a frown, "What do you want to do?" "Nothing, I just want to make this game more fun," he said, snapping his fingers again. Then, a round hole suddenly opened in the ceiling, and a strange black box slowly fell down and landed directly next to the iron cage. Then, a 5-minute countdown suddenly appeared on the front of the box. This scene gave Zai a bad feeling in his heart, and he immediately looked up and asked, "What on earth is that thing? What do you want to do to Sunday?" The other party waved his hands and said, "It's nothing, I just want to make this game more exciting." He pointed at the box, smiled evilly, and said to Zai, "The rules of this game are like this. You need to rescue the girl within 5 minutes. If you succeed, then congratulations, you have successfully won the beauty. If you fail to rescue her within 5 minutes, then the box will..." Boom! The other party slowly raised a fist, and finally opened it suddenly, showing a playful expression to Zai, "Then unfortunately, your friend is about to die." Chapter 97, Power Revealed. At this time, Zai felt cold all over, his body was trembling slightly, his breathing was rapid, and his eyes were bloodshot. Although many things happened during his journey, he had never been as angry as he was now. At this moment, he felt like he wanted to pull the person on the screen out and tear him apart alive. However, he knew that he didn't have that much time now, so he immediately took a step and rushed towards Sunday in the cage. He absolutely could not accept that his important companion died in front of him. However, the iron arm on the other side immediately blocked in front of him, raised both palms and used the pushing skill. The forest lizards who saw this scene couldn't help but cry out, and immediately used their respective skills to try to prevent the subsequent collision, but their skills were quickly blocked by the blizzard of the iron bag. At this time, Zai's eyes were wide open, his fists were clenched, and he looked at the iron arm blocking in front of him, and swung his fist fiercely. "Get away from me!" Boom! When the iron palm of iron arm collided with Zai's iron fist, powerful energy overflowed. The result of this collision was far beyond everyone's expectations. The two sides were only in a stalemate for a moment, and then Iron Arm felt a powerful force, and then his whole body flew out like a kite with a broken string. Even the man on the screen couldn't help but be stunned by this scene, but then he became extremely excited. "Yes, that's right, if you don't have such power, how can you fight against us? You are really awesome, Zai." After knocking away the iron arm, Zai once again headed towards the cage. Although there was no Pokémon to confront him head-on this time. The iron track stopped rolling and suddenly raised its front hoof, then stomped heavily on the ground. The strong seismic wave was transmitted to Xiaozai. The horrible vibration made Xiaozai's body pause, but it still did not stop his steps. The other party just paused for a moment and continued to move forward, ignoring the iron track on the side. Just when he was about to use the earthquake again, a fist suddenly emerged from the ground and hit him hard on the chin, knocking him flying. The figure of the Infernape emerged directly from the ground. On the other side, the forest lizard kept using its seed machine gun on the iron arm, the abandoned monkey's fist of angry and the iron warrior's continuous slashing skills kept colliding, and the thorn dragon king kept using his water gun skills on the iron bag. Xiaozai's Pokémon used their abilities to resist the iron warrior and his men. Looking at Xiaozai, who was moving forward like a cage, the black shadow on the screen raised his eyebrows slightly, then stretched out his hand, fiddling with something, but then, the floor in front of Xiaozai opened again, and a green steel behemoth appeared in front of Xiaozai. The moment the opponent saw Xiaozai, he immediately leaped up, used the pounce skill, and pounced towards Xiaozai. Although Xiaozai was caught off guard and the opponent pushed him back with his own weight, Xiaozai reacted in time. He suddenly stood firm, steadied his body, reached out and grabbed the opponent's arm, slid back for a distance, and then exerted force suddenly, throwing the Pokémon that looked like bank IRAs out. However, the opponent obviously would not let Xiaozai break through so easily. While falling downwards, he put his hands together, and then countless rocks quickly surrounded Xiaozai and then fell to the ground. Xiaozai frowned, looked at the stones flying towards him, and glanced at the box in the cage. There were only 2 minutes left. Xiaozai immediately made up his mind and continued to move forward, while constantly swinging his fists to knock away the stones that were thrown at him. Even the man hiding in the dark was shocked by this scene. Although he had long known that the person in front of him was very extraordinary, he did not expect that he would have such terrifying fighting power. However, the other party did not lose his composure because of this. Seeing Xiaozai getting closer and closer to Sunday, the man nodded gently, then took out a button and murmured, "I'm really looking forward to the spectacular scene and your expression that will follow." Then he moved his thumb slightly and pressed it down. The black box instantly emitted a dazzling white light, and then... boom! The strong blast blew Xiaozai away directly, and his body was burned by the flames. However, he didn't care about so much at this time. He immediately stood up, stretched out his trembling hand forward, and looked at the scene in front of him with dull eyes. The flames of the explosion engulfed the iron cage, and the sundae inside disappeared as well. The air was filled with the smell of gunpowder. The Pokémon that were fighting stopped their actions. The forest lizard and the others looked at the scene in disbelief. The loud noise of the explosion was still ringing in his ears, but for Xiaozai, the world seemed to have stopped. Xiaozai had imagined the scene after parting with his companions. After all good things must come to an end. He thought that if it were him, he would be able to face it calmly, but he never thought about leaving. At this moment, he wanted to roar, but no sound came out when he opened his mouth. Even his feet seemed to be nailed down and he could not move. Unprecedented anger and resentment filled his chest. At this moment, the 4 black crystals around emitted a strong black light, and then took advantage of the moment when Xiaozai was stunned and directly merged into his body. The man who witnessed this scene couldn't help but smile. If it weren't for his good upbringing, he would have laughed out loud. As the crystal merged into Xiaozai's body, a boundless darkness enveloped his heart, and his eyes slowly turned scarlet. At the same time, Xiao Yang and others were looking for clues in Dr. Akihabara's house. Scythe, who was searching around, accidentally glanced at his sickle. At this moment, he suddenly noticed a figure reflected by his smooth sickle, and that figure did not belong to anyone present. Upon noticing this, Scythe immediately turned around and used air slash in that direction, and the sharp blade of wind soon exploded at the opponent's position. Xiao Yang and others who heard the sound immediately looked in the direction of the sound. That's just. Flying out from the smoke was a brown Pokémon that looked a bit like an alien in people's minds, with 3 red, yellow, and green buttons on its hands. It's Daewoo Monster. Seeing this, Xiao Yang immediately shouted, "Catch him quickly, don't let him run away." It was really abnormal for Pokémon from the Unova region to appear in such a place. Xiao Yang and Yulongai Yuan immediately ordered Scyther and Scyther to attack. The dragon wave of the staff-tailed scaled dragon and the air slash of the Scyther came one after another, but the opponent directly used a substitute skill to block their attacks, and then quickly escaped. "Hurry up and chase him, Don't let him run away. Just as the two rushed out of the mansion, a familiar figure came towards them. The other party's appearance directly surprised the two of them. Why are you here? Chapter 98. Explosion. Looking at the panting woman in front of him, Xiao Yang asked curiously, Sunday, how did you escape from the online world? And why isn't Zai with you? Yes, the girl in front of him was the Sunday who was supposed to be swallowed by the explosion in the online world. However, she took a deep breath, patted her chest, and asked Xiao Yang and the others with some doubt, what online world? What are you talking about? Seeing the puzzled look on his face, Xiao Yang began to doubt himself. Was my previous guess wrong? Or was I deceived by the uphost who introduced that episode? In fact, Xiao Ji and his friends did not enter the online world at all. Looking at Xiao Yang who was already lost in thought, Yulongai Yuan finally asked Shende, where did you and Zai disappear to just now? We thought you were teleported to the online world. After hearing what Yulong Yuan said, Shang Dai couldn't help but show him a puzzled look. Teleport to the internet world? What are you talking about? How is that possible? But then she explained, actually, I'm not very clear. When I woke up, I found myself on the outskirts of Matcha City. I flew back on a desert dragonfly. By the way, you haven't found Zai yet. Then she seemed to have thought of something, and immediately asked Yulongai Yuan and the others. Yulong Yuan shook his head and said, no, we haven't found him yet. Xiao Yang, who had come to his senses, also said, we thought he would be with you. Hearing Xiao Yang say this, Shende sighed, shook his head slightly, and said, when I woke up, I was alone, and I didn't know where he was teleported to. Hearing what Shende said, Xiao Yang stroked his chin and said, that is to say, you were actually taken to another place similar to teleportation, rather than entering the cyber world. But that's strange. The device was obviously operated by someone. What was the purpose of the other party doing this? Simply to teleport you away. Sunday was very confused as to why Xiao Yang and the others thought that Zai and I had entered the online world. He couldn't help but ask, why do you think Zai and I were teleported to the online world? And you guys rushed out in such a hurry, did you find something? When they heard Sunday's question, the two did not answer him, but looked at each other. Then they reacted and kept looking around, but they could not find the figure of Dae monster. Xiao Yang couldn't help but curse inwardly, damn it, he actually escaped. Yulong Yuan also sighed and said, hey. The clue is broken again. What should I do next? Seeing the two of them like this, Shende immediately realized that they must have discovered something, and hurriedly asked, did you find any clues? The two nodded silently and were about to speak. Boom! Hearing the loud explosion, the three of them immediately turned around and found that a raging fire was burning on the top floor of the building not far ahead. A large amount of black smoke floated into the air. Then, the crowd began to become chaotic and screams continued. But soon, a lot of sirens were heard in the distance, and at the same time, some capable trainers released their Pokémon to help. The three of them looked at each other, and then immediately ran towards the disaster site. When they were about to approach the building where the accident happened, two figures suddenly rushed out from the black smoke. That is. Yulong Yuan on the side immediately recognized one of the figures. It was the Dae monster he had encountered before. Xiao Yang just froze in place, looking at another figure in disbelief. Or should I say two figures, because that person was sitting on a Pokémon with a very strange appearance. It was a red and blue Pokémon whose entire body was made up of various ellipses. As for the other figure, looking at the other person's blue-green hair, Xiao Yang couldn't help but asked solemnly, why are the people from the exploration team here? The other party seemed to have noticed Xiao Yang's gaze, then turned around, smiled at him silently, and left quickly. When Xiao Yang saw the other party's weird smile, he suddenly had a bad feeling and immediately ran towards the scene. Hey, Xiao Yang, why are you running so fast? The police and the fire brigade are already on the way. This small fire can be easily put out. Don't worry, Yulong Yuan said to Xiao Yang. Xiao Yang turned around and shouted at him, stop talking nonsense, release all your flying Pokémon. If I'm not mistaken, Zai is probably there. As he said that, he pointed to the burning top floor. What? Hearing each other's words, the two were startled. Then Sunday was the first to react. He immediately released his desert dragonfly, jumped directly up, and commanded the desert dragonfly to fly there. Yu Longyuan gritted his teeth, then released his Haxorus and Garchomp, jumping directly onto Garchomp's back, while Xiao Yang also rode on Haxorus. The two Pokémon immediately flew towards the building, and the people who were watching or putting out the fire nearby noticed them and immediately shouted at them to try to stop them, but Xiao Yang and the others still rushed forward regardless. Of course, they would not be so stupid as to rush directly into the sea of fire. Instead, they commanded Land Shark and others to use their special skills to extinguish the flames, and Haxorus even directly used the skill of praying for rain. After the fire slowed down, Shende commanded the desert dragonfly to rush in regardless of anything. Xiao Yang and Yulongyuan didn't even have time to react before they saw the other party rushing in directly. Fuck! This silly girl is dying. The two who saw this scene couldn't help but spit out the national treasure that had not been used for a long time, but then they commanded the Pokémon to rush in together. After rushing into the flames, Sunday immediately released his Radon and Swampert. Relying on their resistance to fire, they used their skills to open a path for Sunday. Now she took out a wet handkerchief to cover her mouth and nose, and then with their help, she moved forward. The scorching flames caused her hair to curl slightly, but it was not a problem under the protection of her Pokémon. Soon, she found the figure lying in the rubble. Next to him was a man with glasses whose hands and feet were tied, and 5 technological Pokémon. At the same time, the man who left Matcha City with Deo looked at the chip in his hand and murmured, "I didn't expect to meet the man that the adults mentioned. I have to say that his strength is really terrifying. He actually collapsed the online world. If it weren't for this polygon, I might have." But then he looked up again, with an indescribable expression on his face, and said quietly, "I am really looking forward to the future holy war. Who will win between you, my lord, and this child of destiny?" Chapter 99. Afterwards. As night falls, the ward of the Pokémon Center is quiet. Although it is called a Pokémon Center, it also serves as a hospital and can provide medical treatment for ordinary people, but the amount is limited. At this time, Xiaozai was lying on the hospital bed, his forehead covered with cold sweat, his heart beating like a drum, as if he was in a nightmare. Suddenly, Xiaozai opened his eyes and found that everything around him was white, with white walls, white sheets and white curtains hanging on the head of the bed. He turned his head and looked out the window. The city lights were brilliant in the night, and everything seemed a little unreal. Xiaozai touched his head in confusion and muttered, "Why am I here? It hurts." Then, he suddenly felt a sharp pain, and then seemed to remember something. He immediately turned over the white quilt covering himself. When he was about to get out of bed, he heard a click and the door suddenly opened. Then, a pleasant and extremely familiar voice came into his ears. "I didn't expect it would be handled so late. If I had known this would happen, I would have asked Mr. Keith to help me resolve it." Then came 2 more familiar yet somewhat helpless voices. "There's nothing we can do. After all, we rushed into the fire in full view of everyone. It's normal to be questioned. That's right, not to mention the things we found in there. To be honest, I really don't understand this world anymore." Xiaozai looked carefully and found that the girl who should have been swallowed by the explosion in his impression was walking in from the door intact. At this time, the lights in the room were turned on, and Sunday also found Xiaozai who had woken up. He couldn't help but said happily, "That's great, Xiaozai, you finally woke up." As he said this, he walked quickly towards Xiaozai. Seeing this, Xiao Yang and Yu Longyuan followed him and said to Xiao Ji, "How do you feel? Are you feeling better? Is there anything else wrong? Although considering your physical condition, there shouldn't be any problem, but after all, such a huge explosion happened. What's wrong with you, Ash? Why are you looking at me like that? Is there something on my face?" At this time, Sunday found that Xiaozai was staring at her blankly the whole time without any response, which made her feel a little confused. Just when she wanted to ask something else, the thing that shocked Xiao Yang for a whole year happened. Xiaozai suddenly stood up, stretched out his hands and hugged Sunday, who was looking at him worriedly. Faced with this sudden situation, the 3 of them froze in place, and the first to react was Sunday, the person involved. Her eyes widened instantly, her heart beat faster, her breathing became rapid, she felt a little breathless, a faint blush quickly appeared on her cheeks, and even steam came out of her head. what's going on? Her mind was blank at this moment. She never expected that the other party would suddenly attack her under such circumstances. She was so nervous that she couldn't even speak. What was even more shocking was Xiao Yang. He was very familiar with Xiao Ji. Although this Xiao Ji was a little different from the Xiao Ji in the original work, his emotional intelligence was actually not that high. Now he made such a move. It was really... Hiss, is this still the Zai I know? Could it be that the fire has directly opened his mind? Yu Longyuan turned his head stiffly, nudged Xiao Yang with his elbow, and said, should we leave now? After all, it's not good for two bright lights to stand here. But before Xiao Yang could answer, Zai's words were heard, excited and relieved. Great, Sunday, you're okay. After everyone calmed down for a while. At this time, they were sitting around the hospital bed. Xiao Yang rested his chin with both hands and said, in other words, Zai, you went to a very strange place, where Sunday was captured by the mastermind behind this online incident, and you were asked to break through the defenses of the Pokémon he released within the specified time and rescue Sunday. Yu Longyuan also took over Xiao Yang's words and said, if Sunday is not rescued within the specified time, she will be blown to death. The most important thing is that the other party did not follow the rules at all. The explosive device was activated the moment you approached Sunday. At this point, the two couldn't help but look at Sunday on the side. The blush on her face had not faded yet. Then they turned back and said to Zai, but Sunday told us that she was teleported to the outskirts of Matcha City. Sunday nodded silently, lowered his head and did not dare to look Zai in the eye, but still said, I can be sure that I was not caught by anyone. Not to mention that I didn't feel anything at all. It took me more than 10 minutes just to get from the suburbs to Matcha City. Zai nodded and said, it was about the same time from the time I entered that strange place to the time I lost consciousness. Yu Longyuan also said, from the time you were teleported away by that strange device until the explosion occurred, it was almost this time, which means that the time doesn't match at all. Listening to their words, Xiao Yang also understood something, and then said, if I am not mistaken, Xiao Ji, the Sunday you saw should be fake. Fake. Zai looked at Xiao Yang with some surprise. The other party did not keep him waiting for long. He nodded and said leisurely, if I am not mistaken, the situation at that time should be like this. First of all, Zai, you have indeed entered the online world. I am sure of this. Online world. After hearing Xiaoyang's words, the other two couldn't help but look at each other. Shende asked in confusion. After all, he and Yulongyuan had talked about the online world before. Xiao Yang nodded at them and said, we have all seen the mastermind behind this. He's the man we saw before, the one rushing out of the fire. The Pokémon he was riding is called Porygon B, a very special man-made virtual Pokémon. Its creator should be Professor Akihabara. The other party first teleported you both to the cyber world through that machine, but on the way used Porygon B's ability to take Sunday out alone. The Sunday that Zai saw in the cyber world should be a virtual one created by the other party using computer technology. After all, according to what you said, Zai, Sunday has been in a coma and has not even moved. Hearing Xiao Yang's words, Xiao Ji's eyes lit up and he said, it turns out that I have really entered the online world. Technology is really amazing. Shende looked at Xiao Yang with a puzzled look on his face and said, how do you know about this? Ah, this is... Crack. Xiao Yang realized that he had said too much and was about to explain himself, but then he heard the sound of the door being opened again. Everyone looked in the direction of the sound and found Miss Joy nodding at them and saying, excuse me, is Mr. Yu Longyuan here? There is a call for you. Chapter 100, Communication with Du. At this moment, Zai and the others looked at the figure on the phone screen somewhat embarrassedly. The other party also sighed slightly, and then said to them, it seems like it has only been a short time, and you have encountered such a big thing again. Yu Longyuan said with a look of deep sorrow, it's a pity that I basically didn't participate in it. I just played a supporting role. By the way, cousin, has this matter been reported to you? The man in the picture was none other than Du, whom Zai and the others had met not long ago. He nodded slightly and said, actually, the most important thing is the 5 Pokémon that you gave to Miss Junsha. Are they so efficient? We give it to her at noon and she sends it directly to the Alliance in the evening. Yu Longyuan said with some surprise. Xiao Yang, on the other hand, asked, is there anything wrong with those Pokémon? Has the League found out anything? The 5 Pokémon they mentioned were none other than the Iron Warriors. To be honest, when Xiao Yang saw these paradoxical Pokémon, he really wanted to capture them directly. But considering that he didn't know much about these Pokémon, and their unexplained appearance at the scene was really suspicious. Of course, Xiao Yang has now learned the origins of these Pokémon from Zai. But after careful consideration, he still did not tell this plan, but discussed with Sunday and the others to hand over these Pokémon to Junsha. After all, who knows if they will have other safety risks. And the most important thing is, even if he captures it, it will be of little use. After all, once it is released, it will attract attention, and then he will have to compromise with the alliance or other forces. After all, both himself and Zai and the others are still too weak, and it is also very expensive. Although it is helpless, we can only leave it to the alliance. Du nodded and said to them, to be honest, these Pokémon are really magical. They are supposed to be creations of technology, but they have real life. The alliance has sent a large number of scientific researchers to analyze them. Zai, on the other hand, said with a worried look on his face, will the Iron Warriors be okay? Iron Warrior? Oh, you mean those Pokémon, don't worry, I've gone to check on them, and their practices are quite law-abiding, and they won't cause any harm to those Pokémon. The other 4 Heavenly Kings and I will check on them from time to time, and with President Damaranch and Mr. Xuecheng here, no one else dares to act rashly. Xiao Yang agrees with this point. Professor Oak, no, Champion Oak, needless to say, no matter which world it is, they treat Pokémon extremely seriously. As for President Damaranchi, I have met him before. He is a kind and amiable old man. There shouldn't be any problem with them watching over him. Hearing what Du said, Zai also breathed a sigh of relief, patted his chest and said, if that's the case, that's great. Yu Longyuan glanced at him strangely and said, Zai, weren't you beaten badly by them? Why do you still care about them now? Zai just shook his head, put his hand on his heart and said, these are 2 different things. They were mainly used by the bad guys. I can feel that they are not as brutal as imagined. They are just more warlike. And when I was fighting with them, the hostility I felt came from another force, something hidden deep in their bodies. After hearing what Zai said, Du on the screen couldn't help but frowned and asked, Zai, I heard that these Pokémon seemed to have fallen together with you at that time. Can you tell me what happened to you? Hearing what Du said, Zai nodded and then told him what happened in Matcha City. After hearing what happened, Du fell into deep thought. After a moment, he looked up and said, I understand. Next, you should have a good rest in Matcha City. I will call you in 2 days. If possible, I may be able to give you a surprise by then. After hearing what Du said, no one else said anything, but Yu Longyuan spoke first, oh. Cousin, what kind of reward do you want to give us? After all, we have solved a big case and resolved the network crisis in Matcha City. You should at least give us an alliance gold card, right? Also, we don't accept verbal rewards, such as medals or something like that. Forget about that. Hearing what Yu Longyuan said, Du couldn't help but glared at him, and then said, how dare you talk about this? You actually rushed into the fire scene without any preparation. I haven't settled the score with you yet. If I hear something like this again, do you believe that when the league competition comes, I will bring your cousin here directly to give you a good practice? Hearing Du's words, Yu Longyuan couldn't help but think of his cousin who was so heroic and wielding a whip. He shuddered and said tremblingly, haha, I was just kidding. My cousin is the gym leader of the Smokescreen Gym. How could we trouble her to come here in person? Finally, he patted his chest and said, don't worry, I will definitely win the championship in this league competition. When the time comes for the King of Kings tournament, you must prepare well, cousin. When the time comes, look at me, the real dragon, and I will beat you, the fake, cough cough. Yu Longyuan was about to say something, but when he saw his cousin's meaningful expression, he couldn't help but cough and immediately changed his words, defeat you, the dragon messenger, completely. Okay, I'll wait for you. I hope you can't even make it to the quarterfinals. According to the information I have obtained so far, this session is full of strong people. Then, he turned his gaze to Zai and the others and said, you should also try your best, Zai. We the 4 heavenly kings will go to watch the league competition, and even Mr. Xuecheng will go. If you can win, you will not only get rich rewards, but also can challenge our 4 heavenly kings. If you can defeat us, you can directly replace us. Although what the other party said was a little unrealistic, Zai still said excitedly, "Don't worry, Mr. Du, I will definitely win the championship and challenge you when the time comes." Du also admired people like Zai who were full of fighting spirit. He nodded at them and said, "Okay, I'll wait for you. If anything happens again, remember to call me." That's all for now. There are still some things to do in the alliance. After saying that, the screen in front of him turned black.